Welcome to the extremely boring stories today we listening. The era of ignorance in Mecca. A city that worked. You are standing in Mecca before Islam, not during a dramatic moment, not during war or revelation, but on an ordinary day. Nothing special is happening. And that is exactly the point. The sun rises the same way it always does, slow and bright, touching the stone houses and narrow paths. Mecca is already awake. People move early here because heat punishes delay. There are no clocks, no bells, no schedules written down. Time is measured by shadows, hunger, and routine. This is the era of ignorance, not because people lacked intelligence, but because meaning had not yet been organized around ethics. Life functions. Systems exist. Trade flows. Families survive. But very little asks whether something should be done, only whether it can be done. Mecca is not a farming town. You can't grow much here. No rivers, no green fields. Survival depends on movement, caravans in and out, goods passing through. That alone gives the city importance. If you control Mecca, you control trade routes between Yemen and the north. So Mecca works hard to stay neutral, open, and profitable. You see traders weighing goods with stones that are not always honest. Slightly lighter stones mean slightly more profit. No one calls it theft. It's just how things are done. If someone notices, they argue. If they don't, business moves on. There is no central government. No police force. No written law. Authority belongs to tribes, and tribes remember everything. Justice is not about fairness, it's about balance. If someone from one tribe kills someone from another, the response isn't prison. It's retaliation, compensation, or war. Sometimes the matter lasts decades. You learn early that protection matters more than morality. Being right means nothing if you're alone. The Kaaba stands at the center of the city, already ancient, already sacred. But it is not empty. It is full, crowded with idols, each representing a tribe, a god, a history. People come to worship, but also to trade. Sacred months ensure temporary peace so caravans can pass safely. Religion here supports economics, not ethics. People don't question this. Why would they? It works. Daily life is repetitive. Men handle trade, negotiation, and tribal affairs. Women manage households, children, and survival within the limits allowed to them. Some women have status, usually through powerful families. Most do not. Marriage is practical. Love is optional. Some men have multiple wives. Some marriages last. Some don't. Divorce is informal. Women's consent is inconsistent. Again, no one writes rules, customs decide. Children are raised early into responsibility. Boys learn loyalty and toughness. Girls learn endurance. Orphans struggle. Without a protector, life becomes dangerously thin. Charity exists, but it is selective. Kindness is personal, not systemic. Slavery is everywhere, but it is not discussed. Slaves cook, carry, clean, and serve. Some were captured in war. Some were born into it. Some were sold due to debt. Their presence is so normal that no one explains it. At night, people gather. Stories are told. Poetry is recited from memory, long, detailed, precise. Poetry preserves history better than records. A good poet can immortalize a tribe or destroy it with words. Reputation is fragile here. You notice something important. People value honor deeply, but honor is narrow. It protects strength, lineage, and reputation, not mercy, not equality, not the weak. This is not chaos. It is order. A harsh, functional order shaped by scarcity and survival. And because it works, few imagine it could be different. Yet beneath the routine, small cracks exist. Some people quietly dislike idols but still worship them. Some feel uneasy about burying daughters alive but stay silent. Some wonder why the poor stay poor and the powerful stay protected. These thoughts are rare and private. Most people don't think historically. They think daily. What will I eat? Who protects me? Who do I owe loyalty to? The weight of what was normal. After that ordinary day ends, nothing changes the next morning. And that is what makes this period important. History often feels loud when you look back at it, but living inside it feels quiet. Mecca continues exactly as before, repeating itself with small variations that never quite become questions. You wake again to heat and dust. The same paths, the same voices. But now you start to notice the cost of how normal things are. Tribal loyalty remains the backbone of life. If you belong, you are protected. If you don't, you are exposed. This creates a city where belonging matters more than behavior. A cruel man from a strong tribe lives safely. A kind man without backing lives carefully. Morality bends around power. Blood feuds are not accidents, they are systems. A single insult can travel across generations. You might grow up knowing the name of a man you are expected to hate, even if neither of you remembers why the conflict began. Ending a feud requires negotiation, compensation, or exhaustion. Sometimes no one remembers the original injury, only the duty to respond. Mecca prides itself on stability, but that stability is fragile. It depends on balance, between tribes, between trade partners, between gods. Too much disruption could collapse the whole arrangement. That fear keeps people obedient to custom. Religion fills the gaps where law does not exist. The idols around the Kaaba are not just objects, they are contracts. Each idol represents protection, identity, and legitimacy. Removing one would insult an entire tribe. So the idols stay, multiplying over time. Pilgrims come not because they are spiritually transformed, but because pilgrimage is profitable and traditional. Sacred months reduce violence, which protects commerce. Faith here is functional. It keeps things running. But this kind of belief has limits. It doesn't tell you why suffering exists, only how to accept it. It doesn't demand justice, only ritual. It doesn't challenge behavior, only reinforces identity. Women experience this system unevenly. Some wealthy women run businesses, arrange caravans, and manage wealth. But this freedom is inherited, not guaranteed. For most women, survival depends on marriage and male guardianship. Widows without sons face sudden vulnerability. A woman's value often lies in the alliances she creates, not in herself. Infant girls are sometimes buried alive. Not everywhere, not by everyone, but often enough to be known. The reasons vary: fear of poverty, fear of dishonor, fear of future shame. No council debates this. No law forbids it. Silence allows it to continue. You notice how suffering becomes invisible when it is shared by many. Slavery fits into this same pattern. Slaves are essential to daily comfort. They cook, clean, carry water, tend animals. They have no legal standing. Kind masters exist, cruel ones too. But kindness is optional. No rule demands dignity. Slaves do not imagine freedom the way modern people do. They imagine survival, favor, maybe manumission someday. The system shapes expectations so deeply that alternatives barely form. Trade grows. Caravans expand. Mecca becomes richer, more connected. With wealth comes inequality. The powerful consolidate resources. The poor depend on seasonal charity. Giving exists, but it is irregular, public, and often self-serving. There is no obligation to care for the weak, only reputation. Poetry continues to dominate culture. Poets' memories, genealogies, victories, insults. They shape identity. A strong poem can raise a man's status overnight. A weak one can erase him. Words matter more than written records because memory is authority. Yet even poets avoid challenging fundamentals. They praise bravery, generosity, loyalty. They rarely praise mercy toward the powerless. Values remain tightly focused. A few individuals begin to feel uneasy. They don't form movements. They don't gather followers. They simply withdraw from excess. They question idols quietly. They dislike drunkenness, gambling, cruelty. They are called strange, not dangerous. When routine could no longer hold. After that long period of quiet tension, Mecca still does not collapse. Cities rarely do. They stretch instead. They bend around their problems and keep going. But stretching has limits, and by now Mecca is carrying more weight than its customs were designed to hold. You can feel it in small moments. A poor man asks for help and is ignored because he has no tribe to speak for him. A woman is inherited as property after her husband dies, and no one objects because this is how it has always been. A slave is beaten publicly, and people look away, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. Intervention is risky. Silence is safer. The system still works, but only for those it was built to protect. Trade continues to expand. Caravans now travel farther, carrying stories along with goods. Meccans hear about other places, lands with kings, written laws, structured religions. These stories don't inspire immediate change, but they plant comparison. Comparison is dangerous to certainty. At the Kaaba, idols multiply. Every new alliance adds another figure, another ritual, another obligation. Worship becomes crowded, confusing, mechanical. People perform acts without understanding why. Faith turns into maintenance. You notice something subtle. People pray more often, but feel less settled. Tribal elders still settle disputes, but their authority weakens as wealth concentrates in fewer hands. Power shifts from age to money. Old men with memory lose ground to younger men with caravans. Tradition begins to compete with profit. This creates resentment. Orphans suffer most. Without protectors, they are easy to exploit. Property is taken. Promises are broken. No court exists to defend them. Charity is unreliable. Their anger is quiet but deep. Women, too, feel the strain. Marriage becomes more transactional. Divorce leaves many unprotected. Female infants remain at risk, especially in times of scarcity. Some fathers hesitate, but hesitation alone changes nothing. Slaves become more numerous as trade expands. Their labor supports wealth they will never touch. Some masters free slaves as acts of prestige, not principle. Freedom becomes a reward, not a right. And yet, something new is happening beneath all this. People are listening more closely when someone speaks about fairness. Not publicly, not loudly, but privately, around fires, during long caravan nights, in moments of exhaustion when survival leaves room for thought. A few individuals openly reject idols, though they keep their beliefs quiet. They are called Hanifs, people who believe in one God without a formal system. They don't organize. They don't preach. They simply refuse to participate fully. Their presence unsettles others, not because they threaten power, but because they imply choice. If belief is a choice, then behavior might be too. Mecca has reached a strange moment. It is stable enough to resist change, but strained enough to need it. Wealth has grown faster than ethics. Power has outrun responsibility. You can see now why historians later call this period the era of ignorance. Not because people were foolish, they were practical, intelligent, skilled, but because knowledge existed without guidance, and strength existed without accountability. Nothing explodes yet. No system collapses overnight. But the city is no longer comfortable inside itself. Customs answer fewer questions. Rituals calm fewer fears. Honor protects fewer people. And somewhere within this city, walking its streets, watching its injustices, living inside its routines, is a person who understands these cracks not as inconveniences, but as moral failures. Mecca does not know it yet. Objects that learned to listen. You wake again in Mecca, and the first thing you notice is not people, but objects. They are everywhere. Carved stone figures stand in courtyards, near doorways, beside wells, and most importantly, around the Kaaba. Some are tall and smooth from centuries of touch. Others are rough, barely shaped, carried in from distant valleys. A few are nothing more than stones with names. These are gods. Not distant gods who live in the sky, but gods you can see, carry, lean against, and argue over. Gods that belong to families, clans, and trades. Gods that travel on caravans wrapped in cloth. Gods that are loaned, inherited, exchanged, and sometimes forgotten. You don't kneel dramatically when you pass them. That would be unusual. Worship here is not emotional. It is routine. Someone touches a stone before leaving on a journey. Someone murmurs a phrase before weighing goods. Someone leaves food overnight, not expecting the idol to eat, but expecting the gesture to matter. Belief here is practical. It fits into daily life the way tools do. No one remembers when it began this way. The stories say these stones once represented righteous people, ancestors remembered for wisdom. Over time, memory hardened into form. Names became objects. Objects became intermediaries. And intermediaries are useful. The idea is simple. The gods are closer than you are to whatever power exists beyond the desert. You don't speak to the unseen directly. You negotiate through something familiar. Something local. Something your tribe recognizes. Each idol listens only to its people. That matters. Religion here reinforces tribal boundaries. Your God protects you, not everyone. Prayer is not universal. It is selective. If disaster strikes another tribe, it may even be seen as proof that your God is stronger. Inside the Kaaba, the idols crowd together in a way that mirrors Mecca itself, different, competing, coexisting because trade requires peace. No one insists their God destroy the others. Balance is more profitable than purity. Pilgrimage seasons arrive, and Mecca fills with visitors. People circle the Kaaba, touch idols, recite inherited phrases. There is no single method. Everyone follows what they were taught. Ritual replaces reflection. Most people don't ask what the idols want. They ask what they require. Offerings follow patterns. Certain days, certain objects, certain words. If something goes wrong, you repeat the ritual, or adjust it slightly. Failure means you didn't do it correctly, not that the belief itself might be flawed. This creates comfort. Predictability. Children grow up learning which idol belongs to them before they learn to read faces. They are taught not theology, but procedure. Where to stand, what to say, when to stop. Faith becomes muscle memory. Some idols are associated with rain, others with victory, others with fertility or protection during travel. But no idol demands moral change. None ask you to treat others differently. None question cruelty, exploitation, or arrogance. The gods accept you as you are. That is part of their appeal. If you cheat someone in trade, you might still pray for success tomorrow. If you neglect an orphan, you might still offer incense. There is no contradiction because the gods do not link belief to behavior. Religion here explains fate, not responsibility. When something good happens, the gods are thanked. When something bad happens, the gods are blamed, or fate is. Rarely is the self examined. And because the gods are many, responsibility is diffuse. If one fails, perhaps another was stronger. If all fail, perhaps the ritual was wrong. You notice how quiet the idols are. They never interrupt. They never say, stop. They never demand consistency. At night, fires burn and stories are told about gods intervening in battles long ago. But those interventions always support strength. Victory proves favor. Defeat proves weakness. Ethics never enter the story. Religion reinforces the world as it already exists. Yet even here, something feels crowded. The number of idols grows with every alliance, with every new trade relationship, with every absorbed tribe. The Kaaba becomes less a sacred center and more a storage space for belief. People perform rituals more frequently, but with less attention. Movements become automatic. Words blur together. You begin to sense a subtle fatigue. Not disbelief, but repetition without meaning. Some people participate out of habit alone. Others out of fear. Few out of conviction. But since everyone participates, participation feels mandatory. And then there are those who don't. They don't bow. They don't touch. They don't offer. They stand slightly apart during rituals, silent, observant. They are not aggressive. They don't smash idols. They don't preach. They simply don't engage. This makes others uncomfortable, not angry, uneasy. Because refusal suggests choice. And choice threatens systems built on inheritance. These quiet non-participants don't yet matter politically. They have no followers. They have no power. But their presence introduces a dangerous idea, that belief might be evaluated, not just received. Most people dismiss them as odd, unpractical, too serious. After all, the idols have always been there. They've seen generations rise and fall. They've watched caravans come and go. They've survived drought, war, and time. So why question them now? But history rarely changes because something fails completely. It changes because something stops answering the questions people begin to ask. And slowly, quietly, people are asking different questions. Rituals without weight. After belief becomes routine, it becomes quieter. You still see the same movements, hands lifted, stones touched, words spoken, but something has thinned out inside them. People perform rituals the way they walk familiar roads, without thinking, without looking down. Rituals now organize time. Certain days belong to certain gods. Certain months forbid fighting. Certain gestures mark beginnings and endings. Religion doesn't interrupt life, it schedules it. That is its strength, and also its weakness. When drought comes, people increase offerings. When caravans fail, they change prayers. When illness spreads, they consult priests attached to specific idols. No one asks why suffering happens unevenly. The question is always procedural. What did we miss? Ritual replaces explanation. This creates a strange emotional distance. People feel anxious when rituals are skipped, but not when injustice happens. Forgetting an offering feels riskier than mistreating a servant. Neglecting a god feels more dangerous than neglecting a human being. The gods demand attention, not conscience. Priests benefit from this system. They don't form a single class, but they exist, caretakers of idols, interpreters of signs, keepers of tradition. Their authority is inherited or earned through proximity, not wisdom. They don't instruct people how to live, only how to perform correctly. Mistakes in ritual are corrected immediately. Mistakes in ethics are ignored indefinitely. You notice how religion has become safe for the powerful. A wealthy trader can sponsor offerings publicly, reinforcing his status. A tribal leader can dedicate sacrifices after violent raids, presenting success as divine approval. Gods are thanked for victories, never questioned for cruelty. This creates a loop. Power validates belief, belief validates power. Women participate in rituals but rarely lead them. Their prayers are private, often desperate. They ask for protection, fertility, survival. Rarely do they ask for dignity. That is not something the gods are known to grant. For enslaved people, ritual offers little comfort. They pray to their owners' gods, hoping for favor. Faith becomes another layer of dependency. The gods they are told to trust do not free them, they merely witness their obedience. Children learn early that gods are not moral judges. They are forces to manage. A god pleased brings benefit. A god neglected brings trouble. No one teaches that gods care how you treat the weak. And because the gods never object, the system feels confirmed. But repetition has consequences. People begin to forget why rituals exist at all. Younger generations know movements but not meanings. Offerings feel like habits inherited from people long dead. Stories blur. Gods are named, but rarely described. The Kaaba becomes crowded not just with idols, but with forgetfulness. You can feel it during pilgrimage seasons. The noise increases. The movement accelerates. People perform rites quickly so they can trade, negotiate, socialize. Sacred acts become background noise. No one stops to ask why the Kaaba matters, only how to use it efficiently. And yet, in quiet corners, doubt grows, not as rebellion, but as discomfort. Some people feel embarrassed explaining their gods to outsiders. Others struggle to reconcile multiple gods with the idea of a single, ordered world. Still others simply feel that something essential is missing, a sense that belief should do something to the believer. They don't phrase it that way. They lack the language, but the feeling is there. A few begin withdrawing from public ritual. Not fully, just slightly. They stand farther back. They shorten prayers. They stop offering expensive sacrifices. They are still polite, still careful. But their belief is loosening. The most unsettling thing is not disbelief, it is indifference. The idols remain silent. They offer no reassurance. They do not respond to doubt, because they have never responded to anything. Stone does not explain itself. You begin to see how belief, when detached from responsibility, becomes fragile. It depends entirely on habit. Once habit weakens, nothing holds it in place. And habits always weaken eventually. The city still believes, officially, publicly, loudly. But beneath that noise, something quieter is happening. People are starting to wonder whether rituals exist to serve humans, or whether humans have been serving rituals for too long. When silence became a question. After rituals lose weight, silence becomes noticeable. You stand near the Kaaba during a quiet moment, not during pilgrimage, not during trade, just an ordinary pause in the day. The idols are still there. They always are, but now they feel different. Not powerful, just present. They do not speak. They never have, but people are listening differently now. For generations, silence was acceptable. Gods did not need to explain themselves. Life was hard. Survival demanded focus. Ritual gave structure, and structure was enough. But Mecca has changed. Trade has connected it to new ideas. Wealth has concentrated power. Inequality has become visible. And when injustice becomes visible, silence becomes louder. You begin to hear people ask questions they would not have asked before. Why do the gods accept cruelty as easily as generosity? Why does victory prove righteousness? Why do the weak always lose, even when they pray? These questions are not shouted. They are whispered, asked at night, asked while walking alone, asked only to people who seem safe. No one expects answers. They are simply noticing the absence of them. Some people attempt reform within the old system. They dedicate offerings meant to protect orphans. They swear oaths to treat slaves kindly. But these acts are personal, inconsistent, fragile. There is no framework to support them. When pressure returns, good intentions dissolve. The gods do not enforce anything. This becomes the central problem. A belief system that cannot restrain power eventually serves it. Tribal leaders continue to benefit from ritual legitimacy. They stand near idols during negotiations. They swear by gods before agreements they do not intend to keep. When broken promises lead to conflict, the gods are blamed, not the liars. Religion becomes a shield rather than a guide. Women, especially widows and divorced women, feel this acutely. They pray for protection that does not come. Their survival still depends on male relatives, not divine intervention. Faith offers hope, but not security. Enslaved people see belief as something done to them, not for them. They are required to respect gods that legitimize their status. Silence here is not peaceful, it is suffocating. Children learn rituals without learning reasons. They copy movements without understanding meaning. The gods become part of scenery, like stones in the road, noticeable only when missing. And then, inevitably, comparison deepens doubt. People hear of monotheistic beliefs beyond Mecca, distant communities who speak of a single god concerned with justice, not trade. These stories sound strange, impractical, but also unsettling. A god who watches behavior. A god who judges leaders and servants equally. A god who speaks in commands, not bargains. Such ideas feel disruptive, dangerous. They threaten everything Mecca has built. But they also explain what the idols cannot. You notice now that people don't defend the idols passionately. They defend the system around them. The peace they ensure. The trade they protect. The traditions they stabilize. The gods themselves are rarely praised for wisdom, only for usefulness. That is the final shift. Belief has become instrumental. And once belief is merely useful, it can be replaced. And once belief is merely useful, it can be replaced. No one topples the idols yet. No one demands change publicly. Mecca does not collapse into chaos. But the foundation has weakened. The silence of stone has been exposed as indifference. People are ready, not for destruction, but for explanation. Ready for a belief that connects worship to behavior. Ready for meaning that does not depend on tribe. Ready for a voice that interrupts injustice instead of blessing it. They don't know this yet. They don't know what form it will take. But the stones are no longer convincing. And when belief loses its voice, even the heaviest idols begin to feel light. Roads that fed the city. You don't understand Mecca until you understand its roads. They arrive quietly, from every direction, thin paths across stone and sand, shaped by feet and hooves rather than planning. These routes are older than memory. They do not belong to Mecca, but Mecca depends on them completely. You wake before dawn because caravans move early. Heat punishes delay. Traders rise while the city still sleeps, checking ropes, adjusting loads, counting animals. Camels groan under weight they know too well. This is not adventure. It is routine labor. Trade is Mecca's lifeblood. Nothing grows here reliably. Food arrives from elsewhere. Cloth, metal, spices, leather, all pass through. Mecca survives because it connects worlds that cannot easily reach each other. Yemen to the south, Syria to the north, sea goods from afar, desert goods from tribes who know the land. You quickly learn that trade is not built on generosity. It is built on leverage. Caravans are expensive. Animals die. Bandits wait. Storms destroy weeks of effort. Profit must outweigh risk, or no one would travel. So traders harden themselves. Mercy becomes inefficient. Contracts exist, but they are mostly verbal. Memory replaces paper. Witnesses replace courts. Trust matters, but only within limits. A trader trusts his cousin more than a stranger. He trusts his tribe more than another. Outsiders must accept worse terms. Weights are adjusted subtly. Measures differ slightly from town to town. No single standard exists. Everyone knows this, and everyone participates. Cheating is not considered immoral, it is considered clever. If you are caught, you apologize or renegotiate. If you are not, the profit is yours. Honesty is praised in poetry, but rarely rewarded in markets. Trade teaches a simple lesson early: survival belongs to the sharp-eyed. Young boys learn numbers before they learn ethics. They watch their fathers negotiate, bluff, withdraw, threaten silence. They learn that weakness invites loss. Kindness is private. Business is not. Caravan leaders hold power. They decide routes, timing, protection arrangements. They negotiate safe passage with tribes along the way, offering payment, goods, or future favor. Sometimes protection is bought. Sometimes it is forced. Violence hovers constantly, but rarely explodes. War interrupts trade. Trade discourages war. So threats are usually enough. Mecca's sacred months help here. Fighting pauses. Roads become safer. Commerce increases. Religion supports economics quietly, efficiently. Inside the city, markets are loud and crowded. Goods are displayed openly. Prices shift by mood, urgency, and appearance. A foreigner pays more. A desperate buyer pays more. A confident negotiator pays less. There is no shame in this. If someone complains, they are told they should have bargained better. Debt is common. Interest exists in forms that avoid naming itself. Loans are extended with expectations attached. Failure to repay leads to loss of property, protection, or freedom. Some debts end in slavery. Everyone knows this risk. Trade creates hierarchy. Those with capital control movement. Those without depend on labor or favor. Success reinforces itself. Failure compounds quickly. Charity appears during good seasons, but it is irregular. A wealthy trader may distribute food publicly to gain reputation. This generosity is strategic. It builds loyalty. It does not build systems. Orphans and widows suffer most here. Without capital or male protectors, they struggle to compete. Markets do not adjust for vulnerability. Need does not lower prices. The city accepts this as natural. Trade rewards efficiency, not fairness. You notice something important. Trade does not require belief in idols, only respect for custom. A man can quietly doubt the gods and still succeed if he honors contracts and alliances. Religion blesses trade, but trade does not depend on religion. This makes belief flexible. Caravans carry more than goods. They carry habits, jokes, rumors, and comparisons. Traders return describing cities with written contracts, fixed prices, rulers who enforce rules. These stories are not admired, but they are remembered. Mecca prides itself on freedom. No king rules here. No taxes are fixed. But freedom has a cost. The strong set terms. A merchant cheated in Mecca cannot appeal to law. He appeals to tribe, reputation, or retaliation. Justice remains personal. You begin to see how trade shapes values. Efficiency becomes virtue. Success becomes proof of wisdom. Failure becomes evidence of weakness. People who struggle are assumed to deserve it. This belief settles quietly into the city's thinking. Trade teaches people to look forward constantly. Next caravan. Next deal. Next season. Reflection feels unproductive. Ethics slow negotiation. The market never stops long enough to ask whether it should exist differently. Yet tension grows. Wealth concentrates. A few families dominate trade routes. Smaller traders become dependent. Laborers feel trapped. Debts linger longer. Freedom narrows for many while expanding for few. You hear grumbling, not ideological, but practical. Prices are unfair. They change the weights. They exploit travelers. These complaints are common. But no one questions the system itself. They want better outcomes within it, not transformation. Trade without mercy is not cruel by intent. It is indifferent by design. The road teaches you this lesson repeatedly: move forward or be left behind. And as Mecca grows richer through these roads, something else grows quietly alongside it, a sense that profit has replaced purpose. The city feeds itself well. But it does not nourish everyone. Contracts that remembered only the strong. After roads come agreements. You see it everywhere. Hands clasped briefly, words exchanged quickly, witnesses standing close enough to hear but far enough to deny later. Contracts in Mecca are spoken, not written. Memory is the record. Reputation is enforcement. This works, mostly. It works because people remember insults longer than kindness. It works because retaliation is expected. It works because no one forgets who cheated them, even if they pretend to. But this system has blind spots. A spoken contract protects equals. It fails the vulnerable. If two powerful traders disagree, negotiation follows. If a weak trader is cheated by a strong one, silence follows. The weak man remembers. The strong man moves on. Disputes are settled by elders, but elders belong to tribes, not principles. Justice bends toward connection. A man with allies speaks louder. A man without them listens. Trade grows more complex, but enforcement does not. You notice how debt quietly reshapes lives. Loans are common for caravans, animals, and goods. Repayment is expected on time. Delay is tolerated briefly. Failure is punished harshly. Interest is woven into the system without naming itself. A loan is repaid with extra as gratitude. If repayment fails, property is seized. If property is insufficient, labor is taken. If labor fails, freedom disappears. Debt becomes destiny. This is not viewed as cruelty. It is viewed as order. A system where obligations must mean something. But obligation without protection becomes trap. People begin journeys already indebted, working not to succeed but to escape loss. Trade becomes less about growth and more about survival. Markets reflect this pressure. Negotiations become sharper. Cheating becomes more refined. Scales are adjusted subtly. Words are chosen carefully to allow denial later. Ambiguity becomes a tool. No one trusts completely, so everyone hedges. Religion offers no correction. Gods bless caravans, not contracts. Ritual does not protect the cheated. No idol enforces fairness. Honesty becomes a personal trait, not a structural value. Some traders maintain reputations for fairness. They succeed slowly, steadily. Others exploit aggressively and grow faster. Both are admired, but the second group gains power quicker. Over time, power defines respect. You see the social shift clearly now. Wealth replaces wisdom. Elders without trade connections lose influence. Young men with caravans speak louder. Poetry adapts accordingly. Poets praise generosity, but also cleverness. They admire those who outsmart rivals, not those who build fairness. Trade stories become heroic tales of risk and gain. Losses are framed as lessons, not warnings. The market absorbs morality and converts it into strategy. Women experience this indirectly but deeply. Many manage trade in absence of husbands, but their legal standing remains unstable. Widows may inherit goods temporarily, but control often passes to male relatives. Their labor sustains trade, but authority avoids them. Enslaved labor increases. Slaves are collateral for debt, part of transaction chains. They become units of value rather than people. Trade normalizes this transformation. And yet, something is happening in the margins. Traders returning from distant lands speak of markets with fixed measures, written records, and rulers who enforce fairness. These stories sound restrictive, but also reassuring. A world where cheating is punished by law, not revenge. A world where debt has limits. A world where contracts outlive memory. Meccans listen politely and dismiss them. Freedom here is prized, but the idea lingers. Meanwhile, inequality becomes harder to ignore. The poor grow poorer not through laziness, but through structure. The rich grow richer not through brilliance alone, but through leverage. People don't describe it that way. They lack the language, but they feel it. Markets that once felt energetic now feel tense. You sense it during negotiations, eyes narrower, voices sharper, patience thinner. Trust erodes slowly, like stone under wind. The system still functions. Goods still move. Profit still flows. But fairness has become incidental. Trade now rewards not contribution, but control. And when control replaces cooperation, the question is no longer whether cheating exists, but how long a system can survive when everyone expects it. Because once trust disappears, even the sharpest deal becomes fragile. And Mecca is approaching that edge quietly, without noticing the distance behind it. Profit that could not answer hunger. After contracts lose balance, consequences spread outward. You notice it first in faces. Tighter expressions. Shorter tempers. The market still moves, but the ease has gone. Every deal feels like a test. Every negotiation carries suspicion. Trust has become expensive. Trade continues to enrich Mecca, but fewer people feel secure inside it. Large trading families now dominate routes and prices. Smaller merchants struggle to compete. Laborers depend on seasonal work with no guarantees. A bad year can erase a life's effort. Hunger becomes uneven. Some homes store grain. Others wait daily for opportunity. Charity appears during festivals, but it is inconsistent and performative. Feeding the poor brings honor, but not obligation. Once the ceremony ends, need returns. Markets do not pause for hunger. Debtors begin selling children into servitude. Widows lose property through manipulated agreements. Orphans are cheated openly, knowing no one will challenge it. These actions are not celebrated, but neither are they stopped. Trade has taught the city efficiency, not care. You begin to understand that profit alone cannot stabilize a society. It can feed it, it can expand it, but it cannot bind it. The idols remain silent. They bless caravans, not victims. They accept offerings from exploiters and exploited alike. Religion does not interfere. This is where the system reaches its limit. People begin to ask questions that trade cannot answer. Why do some work endlessly and remain poor? Why does cleverness excuse cruelty? Why does success protect injustice? These questions are not ideological. They are practical. They come from exhaustion. Some traders attempt reform. They adopt fairer weights. They forgive debts selectively. They treat laborers better. These acts bring respect, but also risk. Competitors undercut them. Profit declines. Fairness proves costly. Without shared enforcement, goodness becomes disadvantage. The market punishes conscience. This realization spreads quietly. People learn that doing the right thing alone does not work. Systems must change, or individuals will be crushed by them. But Mecca has no mechanism for systemic change. Tribal councils protect interests. Elders preserve tradition. Traders defend freedom. No group benefits from limiting its own advantage. So pressure builds. You feel it in arguments that escalate faster. In feuds that start over debts. In violence that breaks out despite sacred months. In resentment that targets wealth rather than enemies. Trade, once a unifier, now divides. Caravans still arrive, but they bring unsettling ideas alongside goods. Stories of societies where law restrains power. Where charity is obligation. Where wealth carries responsibility. These ideas feel threatening, but also relieving. Mecca senses danger, but misidentifies it. Leaders fear disruption of trade, not moral collapse. They reinforce old customs, double down on rituals, remind people of tradition. But tradition cannot fix imbalance. The city has learned to value movement over meaning, profit over people. And now, those values are failing to sustain peace. You stand again in the marketplace, watching deals unfold. Everything looks the same. Voices rise and fall. Goods change hands. But underneath it, something essential has shifted. People no longer believe the system is fair, only that it is unavoidable. And when people stop believing fairness is possible, resentment becomes permanent. Trade built Mecca. Trade fed it. But trade alone cannot teach people why they owe each other anything beyond payment. And that unanswered question waits patiently, like a debt no one wants to acknowledge. Law without writing. You learn quickly in Mecca that law is not written down. It lives instead in people, in memories, in grudges, in names spoken carefully. Justice here is not something you appeal to. It is something you belong to, or don't. You wake knowing exactly who protects you. Your tribe is your shield. Without it, you are exposed in ways that have nothing to do with guilt or innocence. A man with no tribal backing walks differently. He speaks more softly. He chooses silence over argument. There is no central authority. No judge who stands above clans. No prison waiting behind walls. Law here is relational. It moves through families, elders, and alliances built slowly over generations. When harm occurs, the first question is not what happened, but who was involved. If a man is killed, the response is automatic. The tribe of the dead demands justice. That justice can take several forms: blood for blood, compensation, or negotiated settlement. Which one happens depends not on the act itself, but on balance of power. Blood revenge is understood, accepted, even expected. It is not emotional, it is procedural. A killing creates a debt. That debt must be answered. If it is ignored, weakness is revealed. Weakness invites further harm. So memory becomes law. Names of the dead are recited long after details fade. Children grow up hearing them. Your uncle was killed by their people. The sentence needs no context. It explains everything. Feuds do not require maintenance. They maintain themselves. Sometimes compensation is accepted: camels, goods, wealth offered in place of retaliation. This is not forgiveness. It is settlement. The price reflects status. A powerful man costs more to replace than a weak one. Equality does not exist here. Elders negotiate these exchanges. They sit, speak slowly, recall precedents. They do not ask whether violence was justified. They ask whether balance can be restored. Justice aims at stability, not truth. If a strong tribe wrongs a weaker one, the weaker tribe may accept compensation quickly or not demand anything at all. Silence becomes survival. The injustice is absorbed quietly. If a weak tribe wrongs a strong one, punishment is swift. This unevenness is not denied. It is accepted as reality. You notice how this shapes behavior. People are careful not because they fear punishment, but because they fear escalation. A small insult can grow into generational conflict. So caution replaces conscience. Honor governs speech. An insult spoken publicly cannot be ignored. Silence would signal submission. Response becomes mandatory, even if unwanted. Apologies help only if delivered correctly, by the right person, with witnesses. Timing matters. Status matters. Everything matters except intent. Accidents are rarely treated as accidents. Law does not ask why. It asks who pays. Women exist largely outside this legal system, except as symbols. Their harm is avenged through male relatives. Their voices do not carry authority in councils. Their suffering becomes secondary to honor calculations. Orphans face the sharpest edge of tribal law. Without defenders, they are vulnerable to exploitation. Property is taken. Rights are ignored. There is no office to complain to. No written claim to present. Slaves have no legal standing at all. Harm against them is a property matter, not a moral one. Compensation is paid to owners, not victims. Yet despite all this, the system functions. Feuds create deterrence. Compensation prevents endless war. Elders preserve memory, preventing chaos. This is not lawlessness. It is an order designed for survival in a harsh world. But survival is not justice. You begin to see the cost of a system built entirely on memory. Memory is selective. It preserves pain more clearly than context. It sharpens blame while dulling empathy. People remember injuries long after circumstances change. This makes peace fragile. A single act can reopen wounds thought settled. A careless word can revive a feud generations old. Law does not evolve, it accumulates. Mecca lives under the weight of its own past. And yet, people trust this system more than any unknown alternative. Written law feels distant. Central authority feels dangerous. Tribal law feels familiar. It has always been this way. But familiarity does not mean fairness. And as the city grows larger and more complex, memory alone struggles to keep up. Balance that never settled. After you understand how tribal law works, you begin to notice how often it fails, not suddenly, but quietly, through accumulation. Feuds are meant to restore balance, but balance here is temporary. Every settlement carries resentment. Every compensation feels incomplete. Blood cannot be fully replaced by camels or silver, and so memory holds what payment cannot satisfy. You hear elders speak of closing a case, but cases rarely close. They sleep. Children inherit these unfinished stories. They grow up knowing which tribes to avoid, which names to react to. Hatred is not taught aggressively, it is assumed. Like geography. Like weather. Tribal law depends on constant vigilance. Every action is weighed for its potential consequences. People do not ask whether something is right, they ask whether it is safe. This creates restraint, but not morality. Accidental harm still demands response. A man killed by mistake is no less dead. Intent does not soften obligation. Apologies may influence compensation, but they do not erase debt. This hardens behavior. People act cautiously, not compassionately. Risk avoidance replaces kindness. Offering help can entangle you in responsibility. Silence becomes protective. The law discourages intervention. If you witness wrongdoing by a powerful tribe, speaking out invites danger. Better to look away. Tribal law punishes interference as readily as offense. This deepens inequality. Powerful tribes exploit the system subtly. They provoke smaller groups knowing retaliation will be limited. They delay negotiations, drain resources, and force acceptance of unfair settlements. All within accepted norms. Elders justify this by appealing to stability. A strong tribe must remain strong, they argue, or chaos follows. Justice bends to preserve hierarchy. Women suffer within this framework. Their harm is mediated through men. Their lives are valued through honor, not personhood. A woman's death may demand less compensation than a man's. Her testimony carries little weight. Orphans and outsiders suffer most. Without defenders, they become invisible to law. Exploitation rarely triggers response. Memory does not preserve those without voices. Slaves exist entirely outside legal concern. Injury to a slave is addressed only if it damages property. Their pain leaves no legal trace. And yet, people trust this system because it is predictable. Predictability feels safer than fairness. You can anticipate response. You can calculate risk. You can navigate outcomes if you know alliances. Written law might surprise you. Central authority might punish unexpectedly. Tribal law rarely does. But as Mecca grows, this predictability strains. Trade introduces strangers. Strangers complicate memory. Who defends them? Who avenges them? Disputes involving outsiders are harder to settle. Tribal law assumes stable, known groups, not fluid populations. Caravans bring conflicts that don't fit old patterns. A foreign trader harmed in Mecca has no elders to speak for him. His grievance lingers unresolved, breeding resentment. Sacred months attempt to pause violence, but disputes continue beneath the surface. Delayed justice sharpens anger. You begin to sense fatigue among elders. They carry too many stories. Too many precedents. Memory grows heavy. Negotiations take longer. Settlements feel less satisfying. Young men grow impatient. They want swift action, not careful balance. This impatience increases violence. Negotiations take longer. Settlements feel less satisfying. Young men grow impatient. They want swift action, not careful balance. This impatience increases violence. The system begins to wobble, not collapse, but falter. People still rely on tribal law because nothing else exists. But reliance does not equal belief. Quietly, people begin to imagine alternatives. Not clearly, not publicly. Just the idea that law could be something more than revenge management. That justice might protect the weak without provoking war. That memory might not be the only record. These thoughts feel dangerous. They threaten identity. Tribal law defines belonging. To question it feels like betrayal. So doubts remain private. But they grow. And a system questioned privately is already changing, even if it appears stable from the outside. When memory could no longer judge. After generations of repetition, tribal law begins to strain under its own weight. You see it in the way disputes linger longer than before. Negotiations stretch across seasons. Elders repeat arguments they have already settled in earlier years. Memory, once a strength, now becomes a burden. The city has grown beyond what memory can hold. Trade has expanded Mecca's population. Outsiders arrive without genealogies that elders can recall. Alliances shift faster than stories can adapt. Old precedents no longer fit new situations. Tribal law was designed for small, stable groups. Mecca is no longer small, and no longer stable. When violence occurs, retaliation now risks disrupting trade routes, angering allies, and breaking sacred agreements. Blood for blood becomes too costly. Compensation becomes too complex. Balance becomes harder to calculate. Justice slows. Delayed justice feels like denial. Young men grow frustrated. They no longer see elders as protectors, but as obstacles. Honor feels delayed, diluted. Some act without permission, reigniting feuds elders struggled to contain. This accelerates instability. Women and vulnerable groups suffer most during this transition. When law weakens, protection erodes first for those who never had much. Widows are ignored. Orphans are exploited. Slaves remain unprotected entirely. Tribal law has no mechanism to correct itself. It cannot evolve. It can only repeat. And repetition without adjustment leads to fracture. You begin to notice something else. People start appealing to conscience rather than custom. Not openly, but in private arguments. Someone says, "This isn't right," instead of, "This isn't honorable." The language shifts quietly. This is new. It signals a moral awareness that tribal law cannot address. People start valuing peace not just as absence of war, but as fairness. They imagine justice that does not depend on strength. They imagine law that restrains power instead of expressing it. These ideas have no structure yet. No enforcement. No institution. But they exist. Tribal leaders sense the threat. They double down on tradition. They emphasize lineage, precedent, honor. They warn that abandoning custom will lead to chaos. They are not entirely wrong. Change is dangerous. But stagnation is dangerous too. Mecca stands at this crossroads, a city held together by memory, now outgrowing it. The law that once protected identity now limits growth. The system that prevented chaos now enables injustice. People continue to live within it because there is no alternative. But belief in its fairness has faded. And when belief fades, compliance becomes fragile. Tribal law still decides justice publicly. But privately, many no longer accept its verdicts as right, only as unavoidable. This is how systems end, not with rebellion, but with quiet loss of legitimacy. And when legitimacy disappears, even the oldest law becomes hollow. Lives lived indoors. You do not hear women first in pre-Islamic Mecca. You notice their absence. The streets are filled with men, trading, arguing, negotiating, boasting. Poetry echoes with male names. Genealogies list fathers and sons. Tribal histories move forward through male lines like uninterrupted roads. Women exist mostly inside walls. You see them early in the morning, briefly, carrying water, preparing food, tending animals in enclosed spaces. Their movements are efficient, quiet, practiced. Survival has taught them not to draw attention. In Mecca, a woman's life is shaped early by one fact: protection determines everything. A woman belongs first to her father's household. Then, usually, to her husband's. Protection comes from male relatives, not from law, not from belief, not from personal standing. Without protection, life becomes narrow and dangerous very quickly. Marriage is not primarily about companionship. It is about alliance, security, labor, and lineage. Girls are married young, often without meaningful consent. Consent is discussed later by historians, but here it is inconsistent and secondary. Decisions are made by fathers, uncles, or guardians. A girl's future is negotiated like property because, functionally, it is. Some women marry well. They enter stable households, bear children, manage resources, and live lives that feel secure within limits. These women rarely speak publicly, but they hold quiet influence inside homes. Others are less fortunate. Divorce is informal and easy for men. A man can dismiss a wife with words. For women, leaving marriage is far harder. Without children or strong family support, divorce often means vulnerability. Widowhood is especially dangerous. When a husband dies, a woman does not automatically gain independence. In many cases, she is inherited, claimed by a male relative of her husband. Her consent may not be asked. Her preferences rarely matter. She moves from one form of dependency to another. You notice how silence becomes a survival strategy. Speaking too much risks anger. Anger risks abandonment. Abandonment risks poverty. Women learn early that endurance is safer than resistance. Inheritance laws favor men. Property passes through male lines. A woman may manage assets temporarily, but ownership rarely stays with her. Wealth flows past her, not to her. And yet, women work constantly. They grind grain. They raise children. They manage households. They tend animals. They support trade indirectly by sustaining families that allow men to travel. Their labor is essential. Their recognition is minimal. Some women break these patterns: wealthy widows, traders' wives, women born into powerful clans. These women can own property, conduct business, influence decisions. But their exception proves the rule. Status protects them, not gender equality. For most women, safety depends on obedience. Daughters are valued inconsistently. Sons strengthen lineage and defense. Daughters are potential alliances, or potential burdens. In times of scarcity, fear overrides affection. Female infanticide exists. Not everywhere, not always, but often enough to shape behavior. Mothers fear for newborn daughters. Fathers weigh honor against hunger. The act is justified quietly as necessity. There is no public debate. No council discussion. Custom absorbs it. Religion does not intervene. Idols do not condemn it. Ritual does not prevent it. Belief offers no protection. You notice how women carry grief privately. Loss is not acknowledged publicly because it is not politically relevant. A buried daughter leaves no tribal debt to avenge. Marriage, survival, silence, these form the rhythm of women's lives. Love exists, but it is fragile. Kindness exists, but it is private. Injustice exists, but it is normalized. Women are not viewed as moral agents in law or religion. They are viewed as dependents. Their value is relational, not inherent. And yet, within these limits, women remember. They remember pain. They remember kindness. They remember injustice quietly. They teach children. They shape early values. They absorb fear so their families can function. History rarely records this kind of endurance. But endurance leaves marks. And a society that silences half its people carries truths it refuses to hear. Protection that could disappear. After you understand how women live inside Mecca's homes, you begin to notice how fragile their safety really is. Protection is not guaranteed. It is conditional. A woman is safe as long as the men around her remain willing and able to protect her. If a father dies, if brothers lose status, if a husband divorces or passes away, that protection can vanish overnight. There is no law to catch her. Widows experience this most sharply. When a man dies, his wife's future is negotiated by others. She may be claimed by a relative of her husband, sometimes as wife, sometimes as servant. Refusal is risky. Consent is assumed, not required. This practice is not universally enforced, but it exists widely enough to shape fear. Women understand that autonomy is temporary, borrowed, fragile. Divorce deepens this vulnerability. A divorced woman may return to her father's household if it still exists and is willing. If not, her options narrow quickly. Remarriage is possible, but often on worse terms. Marriage becomes less a choice than a shelter. You begin to see why silence is valued. Complaining invites abandonment. Speaking against custom invites punishment. Endurance preserves stability, even when it causes harm. Women develop networks quietly. They share advice. They warn each other. They prepare daughters for realities no one explains openly. Knowledge is passed in whispers. Pregnancy is dangerous. Childbirth carries real risk. There are no formal midwives, no medicine beyond tradition. A woman's value increases if she bears sons. Daughters are welcomed cautiously. Mothers carry an impossible tension. Love for their daughters mixed with fear for their future. Some protect them fiercely. Others internalize the system and justify its harshness as necessity. Female infanticide is discussed indirectly, in euphemisms. It is framed as protection from dishonor or poverty. No one calls it murder publicly. Language softens cruelty. The gods remain silent. You notice how belief fails women specifically. Rituals promise fertility, not dignity. Protection prayers focus on outcomes, not rights. No god demands consent. No idol condemns inheritance of widows. Religion reinforces the existing order by not challenging it. Some women resist quietly. They delay marriages. They negotiate through male relatives. They cultivate influence within households. Resistance here is strategic, not confrontational. A few women achieve remarkable autonomy, managing trade, owning caravans, employing men. But these women remain exceptional, protected by wealth and family connections. Their success does not change the system, it navigates it. Most women live within tight boundaries. Their contributions remain invisible publicly, but essential privately. They stabilize families. They soften conflicts. They raise children who absorb values before law ever reaches them. You begin to sense something important. Women are not passive recipients of this system. They understand it deeply. They adapt to it. They survive within it. But survival is not the same as justice. The gap between endurance and dignity widens as Mecca grows wealthier. As men gain more power through trade, women's dependence becomes more pronounced. And yet, something subtle is shifting. Mothers begin telling daughters that their lives could be different. Not immediately, not openly, but as possibility. They speak of fairness, not just safety. They speak of worth, not just marriageability. These ideas are fragile, unprotected by law or belief. But they exist. And ideas, once spoken, do not disappear easily. The silence that once protected women now begins to feel heavy. Not just oppressive, but unnecessary. And when silence becomes unnecessary, it becomes intolerable. Voices that waited. After generations of quiet endurance, the limits of silence become clear. You notice it first in small refusals. A woman delays answering. A mother questions a decision behind closed doors. A widow asks for conditions before acceptance. None of this is public. None of it challenges authority openly. But each moment stretches the boundary of what has always been assumed. The system still stands, but it no longer fits as tightly as it once did. As Mecca grows richer, households grow more complex. Trade keeps men away longer. Women manage more in their absence. They handle money, negotiate supplies, organize labor, and resolve disputes inside the home. Responsibility expands without recognition. This creates tension. A woman trusted to run a household is still denied authority beyond it. A mother responsible for children's survival has no formal voice in decisions that shape their future. Capability and status drift further apart. You see the cost of this imbalance most clearly in moments of crisis. When famine strikes, women ration food. When debt threatens, women sell possessions quietly. When feuds erupt, women carry fear silently, keeping families intact while men prepare for retaliation. They hold the city together without credit. And yet, the law still does not see them. Tribal justice counts women through men. Religion addresses them through fertility. Trade values them through alliances. None recognize women as independent moral agents. This absence becomes harder to ignore. Mothers begin teaching children differently. They emphasize fairness inside the home, even if the world outside does not reflect it. They teach compassion alongside caution. They tell daughters that endurance is not weakness, but they also tell them it should not be permanent. Daughters listen. They grow up knowing how to survive, but also sensing that survival alone is not the goal. The silence that once protected women begins to fracture. Not into noise, but into awareness. Women start to notice contradictions more clearly than before. A society that values honor but ignores consent. A belief system that accepts cruelty but rewards ritual. A law that protects strength but abandons vulnerability. These contradictions do not immediately produce rebellion. They produce fatigue. And fatigue produces readiness. You feel it in the way women listen when ideas of justice circulate quietly. Ideas of dignity. Ideas that link belief to behavior. Ideas that promise protection without dependence. They do not demand these ideas yet. They wait. Waiting is something women here know well. But this waiting is different. It is not passive. It is attentive. It listens for a language that includes them, not as symbols, not as dependents, but as people whose lives matter beyond marriage and lineage. When such a language appears, it does not need to convince them loudly. It simply needs to acknowledge what they already know. That survival without dignity is not enough. That silence is not proof of consent. That endurance should not be a permanent condition. Mecca does not yet recognize how much of its moral weight rests on women who have never been heard. But that weight is real. And when it shifts, the city will feel it. Poetry louder than law. Words that ruled without writing. Memory that spoke. Before laws were written, before records were kept, before authority learned to seal itself in ink, Mecca was ruled by sound. You hear it before you understand it. Voices rise in the evening air, measured and deliberate. Words are chosen carefully, arranged with rhythm and balance. People gather, not because they are ordered to, but because listening matters here. Poetry is not entertainment. It is governance. In Mecca, words decide reputation. Reputation decides protection. Protection decides survival. A poet does not merely describe events, he fixes them in memory. A battle remembered through poetry lasts longer than the wounds it caused. A generous act becomes permanent. A shameful one becomes impossible to escape. There is no archive, but there is recall. And recall is powerful. You notice how people fall silent when a respected poet speaks. Not because he commands authority officially, but because his words will travel. They will be repeated. They will be remembered long after witnesses forget details. Poetry becomes law's shadow. Tribal histories are stored in verse. Genealogies are memorized through rhythm. Victories and defeats are shaped into narratives that favor one side and diminish another. There is no neutral account. The poet's loyalty defines truth. This makes poets dangerous. A single verse can ignite a feud or end one. Praise elevates. Satire destroys. Ridicule wounds deeper than weapons because it lingers. A man insulted in poetry is insulted everywhere the poem is heard, which is everywhere. You learn that tribes invest heavily in poets. They protect them, reward them, consult them. A strong poet is as valuable as a strong warrior. Sometimes more so. Law reacts to harm. Poetry prevents it, or provokes it. There are no courts to appeal to, but there are verses that circulate faster than any judgment. If you cheat someone powerful, poetry may expose you. If you wrong someone weak, poetry may ignore it. Words reflect power as much as they create it. Children grow up hearing these verses. They learn who their enemies are before they meet them. They learn pride before humility. They memorize insults that predate them by generations. Poetry preserves memory selectively. You notice how often poems praise courage, generosity, endurance, and loyalty. These values matter because they protect tribes in a hostile environment. But you rarely hear poems about mercy toward the powerless, fairness in trade, or restraint in revenge. Those themes do not serve survival as it is currently understood. Poetry teaches people who they are supposed to admire. And because poetry is public, its lessons feel communal. A value praised publicly becomes expectation. A flaw mocked publicly becomes shame. Law enforces behavior through threat. Poetry enforces it through identity. You begin to see how this system shapes morality. People act not to be just, but to be praised. They avoid wrongdoing not because it is wrong, but because it might be remembered. Silence becomes strategy here too. If something is not spoken, it fades. Many injustices remain unpoetic, too ordinary, too quiet, too inconvenient to verse. Women rarely appear in poetry except as symbols: honor, loss, beauty, alliance. Their inner lives do not matter to verse. Their suffering does not inspire rhythm. Slaves appear rarely, and when they do, it is as background. Orphans appear as reminders of generosity, not as victims. Poetry amplifies what power wants remembered. And because poetry is beautiful, people trust it. They confuse elegance with truth. You notice how disputes are reframed through verse. A raid becomes bravery. A massacre becomes triumph. A betrayal becomes cleverness. Words soften violence, sharpen pride. Poetry does not lie outright. It selects. And selection shapes reality. In a society without writing, this is unavoidable. Memory must choose. But choice carries consequence. Poetry becomes louder than law because it reaches further. It does not require enforcement. It spreads willingly, carried by voices, shaped by admiration. People obey poetry not because they must, but because they want to belong to the story it tells. And yet, poetry has a weakness. It can preserve meaning, but it cannot correct itself easily. Once a verse spreads, it hardens. Changing it feels like erasing identity. This makes poetry resistant to moral growth. You begin to sense a quiet tension. Words hold power, but they do not protect everyone. Those outside praise remain outside protection. And as the city grows, as trade complicates life, as injustice becomes more visible, poetry struggles to keep up. It can glorify the past. But it cannot guide a future that demands accountability. Praise that became power. After you spend time listening, you realize that poetry does more than remember, it ranks. Not everyone is praised equally. Not every action earns verse. Poetry selects what deserves to last, and that selection becomes power. A man praised publicly becomes untouchable. His name travels ahead of him. People expect generosity, courage, dominance, and they treat him accordingly. Even his mistakes are softened by reputation. Poetry cushions him. Another man, equally capable but unpraised, remains vulnerable. His actions fade quickly. Without verse, nothing protects him once witnesses disperse. This is how poetry replaces formal law. Instead of written rules, there are reputational ceilings and floors. You can rise through praise. You can fall through satire. There is no appeal process. Once a verse spreads, it cannot be recalled. Satire is especially feared. A sharp poet can ruin a family's standing for generations. Mockery sticks. Even children inherit shame encoded in rhythm. Violence may fade, but ridicule endures. So people police themselves preemptively. They avoid actions that could inspire poetic attack. They imitate praised behavior even when it costs them personally. Poetry becomes behavioral pressure. You notice how this affects justice. When a powerful man wrongs a weaker one, poets often remain silent. Silence protects reputation. But when a weak man insults a strong one, poets may respond aggressively, reframing the incident as disrespect rather than grievance. Truth bends toward influence. Poetry does not ask who was harmed. It asks whose story will be remembered. This shapes conflict resolution. Instead of fair settlement, people aim for narrative victory. Winning the story matters more than resolving the harm. You see this in feuds. A single verse can reopen old wounds or prevent peace. Elders sometimes delay reconciliation until a poet can frame it honorably. Without poetic justification, peace feels like loss. Even apologies require careful wording to avoid shame. Poetry also reinforces hierarchy. Lineage is praised repeatedly. Ancestors are elevated beyond criticism. To challenge a powerful family is to challenge centuries of verse, a nearly impossible task. Women remain marginal in this system. When they appear in poetry, it is usually as metaphors: the land, the prize, the loss, the honor. Their voices are absent. Their experiences are filtered through male narrators. A woman harmed unjustly rarely inspires verse unless her suffering serves a male story. Her pain alone does not justify memory. Enslaved people are almost invisible to poetry. Their labor sustains life, but their lives do not inspire song. Silence becomes erasure. You begin to see how poetry, while powerful, is not neutral. It amplifies what already matters to those in control. And yet, people love it. They gather eagerly. They memorize verses. They repeat lines while working. Poetry gives beauty to harsh lives. It creates continuity. It offers pride in a difficult world. This is why it cannot be dismissed. Poetry does what law cannot. It makes people feel seen, at least those it chooses to see. But feeling seen is not the same as being protected. As Mecca grows more complex, poetry struggles to regulate new forms of harm. Trade disputes, debt exploitation, abuse of outsiders, these do not translate easily into heroic verse. They are too technical, too uncomfortable. Poetry remains backward-looking. It celebrates what has already happened, not what should change. You sense unease among younger listeners. They admire the rhythm but question the values. They notice which stories are missing. Which voices never speak. They do not reject poetry. They outgrow its limits. And when a system of words can no longer carry the moral weight of a society, people begin searching for speech that does more than remember, speech that instructs. When words met meaning. After generations of relying on poetry to shape memory and behavior, Mecca reaches a quiet threshold. People still admire the verses. They still gather to listen. They still memorize lines with ease. But something has changed in how they listen. They are no longer satisfied with praise alone. You notice it in the pauses after poems end. In the questions that are not asked aloud. In the way listeners repeat lines thoughtfully rather than enthusiastically. Beauty still moves them, but it no longer guides them. Poetry has preserved the past well. Too well. It has frozen values in forms that no longer match lived reality. Courage without restraint. Generosity without obligation. Honor without accountability. As trade expands and society becomes more unequal, poetry's selective memory becomes harder to accept. People see suffering that poetry ignores. They experience injustice that verse cannot frame without threatening power. The limits of poetic authority become clear. Poets can shame individuals, but they cannot reform systems. They can celebrate generosity, but they cannot demand it. They can mock cruelty, but only when cruelty lacks protection. Words without enforcement lose force. And yet, the hunger for meaningful speech remains. People want words that do more than glorify, words that explain why behavior matters. Words that bind belief to action. Words that speak not just to tribes, but to individuals. This is new. Until now, identity came first. Tribe defined worth. Poetry reinforced it. But now, individuals begin to feel morally exposed. They ask what they owe others, not just what their tribe owes rivals. Poetry does not answer this. It speaks of collective pride, not personal responsibility. You begin to hear comparisons. People talk about messages rather than verses. They mention speech that commands, not entertains. Words that challenge rather than flatter. They speak cautiously, but with curiosity. A different kind of authority is imagined, one that does not depend on lineage, poetic skill, or reputation. One that speaks equally to strong and weak. Poetry feels beautiful, but insufficient. This does not mean poetry disappears. It remains part of life. But it loses its position as final arbiter of truth. It becomes expression rather than law. This transition is subtle. No announcement is made. No poet is dethroned. People simply begin to listen differently. And that is enough. When people stop confusing beauty with morality, space opens for something else. Something quieter, more demanding. Speech that does not praise strength, but questions it. Speech that does not memorialize violence, but restrains it. Speech that does not belong to tribes, but addresses humanity. Poetry ruled because nothing else could carry meaning across generations. But now, meaning demands structure. The city is ready for words that do not just remember, but instruct. Slavery as structure, ownership as normal life. Section 1. Lives that counted as property. In Mecca, slavery is not hidden. It does not exist in dark corners or secret rooms. It moves openly through streets, markets, and homes. You see it so often that at first, you stop seeing it at all. That is how it works. Enslaved people fetch water, carry goods, prepare food, guide animals, guard doors. They walk slightly behind others. They speak only when spoken to. Their presence is constant, unremarkable, expected. No one explains slavery to children. It does not need explanation. It is part of how the world appears to function. People become enslaved in many ways. Some are captured during raids. Some are sold by families crushed by debt. Some are born into slavery, inheriting status the way others inherit names. Trade routes bring enslaved people from distant regions, severed from language, family, and memory. Once enslaved, a person becomes an asset. They are counted alongside animals and goods. Their value fluctuates with age, strength, skill, and obedience. They can be traded, gifted, inherited, or punished. Their labor belongs to someone else. This is not considered cruelty. It is considered order. Slavery supports Mecca's economy quietly and efficiently. Wealthy households rely on it. Trade depends on it. Comfort is built on it. Without enslaved labor, daily life would slow, become harder, less profitable. So the system protects itself. Religion does not challenge it. Idols accept offerings from masters and slaves alike. Rituals do not distinguish between free and owned in moral terms. Belief explains hierarchy rather than questions it. Tribal law reinforces this structure. Harm against an enslaved person is addressed only if it damages property. Compensation is paid to owners, not victims. Pain does not carry legal weight unless it affects value. This teaches a clear lesson: humanity is conditional. You notice how enslaved people learn this early. They lower their eyes. They measure tone carefully. Survival depends on anticipation, reading moods, avoiding attention, performing obedience convincingly. Resistance is dangerous. Escape is rare. The desert is unforgiving. Language barriers isolate. Punishment is public enough to deter imitation. Kind masters exist. Some treat enslaved people gently. Some promise freedom eventually. But kindness here is personal, not guaranteed. A kind owner can die. A promise can be forgotten. Freedom, when it comes, is granted, not recognized. And because freedom is framed as generosity, the system appears humane to those who benefit from it. You begin to see how deeply this shapes thinking. People do not divide the world into just and unjust. They divide it into owned and owning, free and dependent, protected and expendable. Enslaved people live inside households but outside belonging. They hear family stories they will never join. They witness rituals they will never lead. They labor for futures they will not share. Their memories are not preserved. Poetry rarely names them. Law does not record them. Trade counts them but does not hear them. They exist in the present tense only. Children born into slavery grow up without imagining alternatives. They learn their place before they learn their names. Identity narrows to usefulness. This is the quiet power of slavery as structure. It shapes imagination. And because imagination is shaped early, the system feels natural rather than imposed. Most people in Mecca do not wake up thinking about slavery. They wake up thinking about trade, honor, survival. Slavery supports all three invisibly. But invisibility does not mean stability. You begin to sense tension in small moments. When an enslaved person shows intelligence beyond expectation, when loyalty turns into influence, when obedience masks resentment. The system assumes silence equals acceptance. History shows that assumption rarely lasts. But for now, slavery remains unquestioned, not because it is just, but because it is everywhere. Kindness without obligation. After you spend time noticing enslaved lives, you realize something unsettling. Cruelty is not required for slavery to function. Most days, nothing dramatic happens. No public beatings, no screaming, no spectacle. Instead, there is routine, work done quietly, instructions given casually, obedience expected without explanation. This is what makes the system durable. Many enslaved people live under owners who consider themselves decent. They provide food. They avoid unnecessary punishment. They speak kindly at times. They may even feel affection. But affection does not change ownership. Kindness here is optional, inconsistent, and reversible. It depends entirely on the owner's mood, circumstances, and character. There is no obligation to be humane. There is no standard that must be met. A kind master today can become a harsh one tomorrow, or die, passing ownership to someone else. The enslaved understand this uncertainty deeply. They learn not to rely on promises. They accept favor cautiously. Gratitude becomes strategy. Trust is dangerous. Some owners free enslaved people as acts of prestige or piety. Manumission is celebrated as generosity, not justice. The freed person is expected to show lifelong loyalty in return. Freedom comes with strings. A freed person often remains dependent, socially, economically, emotionally. Without tribe, land, or protection, freedom can be precarious. Many continue working for former owners because alternatives are limited. So freedom does not always feel like release. It feels like risk. Children born into slavery inherit this ambiguity. They grow up knowing they might be freed someday, but not knowing when, why, or by whom. Hope exists, but it is vague and conditional. This shapes behavior. Enslaved people compete quietly for favor. Obedience becomes refined. Silence becomes skilled. They learn how to appear useful without appearing threatening. Intelligence must be hidden carefully. You notice how enslaved people often know more than they are allowed to acknowledge. They manage households, understand trade routes, handle finances, care for children. Their competence sustains families that deny their autonomy. This creates a contradiction. A system that depends on the intelligence of enslaved people must also suppress that intelligence publicly. That tension never fully resolves. Religion again offers no correction. Gods accept offerings from masters who free slaves and from masters who abuse them. Ritual does not distinguish between mercy and cruelty. Tribal law reinforces ownership. An enslaved person cannot testify against a free one. Harm to them is measured in loss of value, not loss of dignity. This teaches society to see humanity as tiered. Some lives matter fully. Some matter partially. Some matter only as assets. People internalize this without reflection. They do not think of themselves as cruel. They think of themselves as realistic. And yet, you begin to hear discomfort in certain conversations. A master complains that a slave is too clever. Another worries that kindness makes slaves forget their place. Someone jokes uneasily about loyalty that feels too strong. These are signs of anxiety. Slavery requires constant reinforcement of difference. When that difference blurs, fear emerges. You also notice enslaved people forming quiet communities. They share language fragments. They exchange looks. They protect each other subtly. Solidarity grows beneath surveillance. It is not rebellion. Not yet. It is memory. They remember origins, even when families are lost. They remember fairness, even when denied it. They remember being human in ways the system refuses to record. This memory is dangerous. Because systems built on ownership depend on forgetting that the owned were ever anything else. Mecca does not recognize this threat yet. Slavery still feels normal, necessary, unquestioned. But a system that relies on conditional kindness is always unstable. Because kindness can be withdrawn. And when kindness is the only barrier between order and cruelty, the question becomes unavoidable. When ownership met conscience. After generations of treating ownership as ordinary, Mecca reaches a quiet contradiction it can no longer ignore. The city depends on enslaved labor, and yet, it increasingly depends on the moral appearance of fairness. As trade grows and ideas circulate, people begin to feel discomfort not with slavery itself, but with how exposed it has become. You notice the shift in language first. Masters begin to describe enslaved people as part of the household, even as they buy and sell them. They speak of loyalty and care, even as punishment remains unquestioned. They emphasize kindness publicly, while retaining absolute control privately. This is not reform. It is discomfort. People sense that ownership requires justification now, not just habit. Enslaved people are no longer invisible. They are everywhere, in trade, in homes, in travel, and their intelligence, skill, and emotional depth are harder to deny. A system that treats people as property struggles when those people clearly think, feel, and remember. You see enslaved individuals trusted with responsibilities that contradict their status, managing accounts, raising children, negotiating purchases, guarding secrets. Dependence deepens. And dependence breeds contradiction. Owners begin to fear the very competence they rely on. They tighten control. They remind enslaved people of their place more often. Punishments become symbolic, not always severe, but visible. This reveals insecurity. Slavery requires certainty. Doubt weakens it. Religion still does not intervene. The gods remain silent. But silence now feels like absence rather than permission. People start asking quiet questions, not, is slavery wrong? But, why must it exist this way? The question is subtle, but it matters. It suggests imagination is shifting. Some owners free enslaved people more frequently now, not because the system demands it, but because conscience whispers. They frame freedom as generosity to preserve honor. But generosity repeated too often begins to look like principle. And principles threaten structure. Freed people form small communities, supporting one another. They struggle, but they exist. Their presence disrupts assumptions. A freed person walking freely exposes the fact that freedom was always possible. That exposure is unsettling. You notice enslaved people listening more carefully to discussions of justice, responsibility, and moral accountability. Ideas that speak to universal worth resonate deeply. They do not need persuasion. They need recognition. The system begins to crack not from revolt, but from incompatibility. A society that increasingly values accountability cannot indefinitely maintain ownership. The two pull in opposite directions. Mecca has not abolished slavery. Not even close. But something has changed. Ownership no longer feels inevitable. And when inevitability disappears, systems lose their grip. Enslaved people still wake each day to serve. Masters still command. Markets still trade human beings. But beneath the routine, a question waits, quiet, persistent, unavoidable. If kindness is praised, why is cruelty permitted? If loyalty is valued, why is freedom denied? If all people pray, why are some owned? These questions do not overthrow systems overnight. They weaken them slowly. And when a structure built on ownership begins to feel morally unstable, it does not collapse loudly. It becomes ready. Lives measured before they began. In Mecca, children are not born into innocence. They are born into calculation. From the moment a child is expected, adults begin measuring outcomes. Not hopes, outcomes. Will this child strengthen the family or burden it? Will it add protection or risk? Will it bring honor or future shame? Birth is not just biological. It is political. You notice the difference immediately in reactions. When a son is born, voices rise. Congratulations are public. Pride spreads outward. A son means continuity, another name to add to genealogy, another body for defense, another worker for trade. A daughter's birth is quieter. Not always mourned, not always rejected, but evaluated, weighed, considered. A daughter may bring alliance through marriage. She may bring affection. But she also brings vulnerability. In a society where honor is fragile, a daughter represents risk that must be managed carefully. This risk thinking shapes everything. Children belong not to themselves, but to families. Their bodies, futures, and choices are assets. Love exists, but it operates inside utility. Boys are trained early for strength and loyalty. They are taught names of ancestors, enemies, allies. They learn what they must defend before they understand why. Girls are trained for endurance and discretion. They are taught silence before speech, caution before curiosity. Their movements are monitored. Their reputations are guarded more closely than their safety. Family honor does not depend on children being happy. It depends on children behaving predictably. This pressure is heaviest on daughters. You hear euphemisms whispered: protecting honor, avoiding hardship, ending worry early. These phrases hide acts too heavy to say directly. Female infanticide exists within this logic. Not universally, not constantly, but often enough to be known, feared, and internalized. It is not done in anger. It is done in calculation. Poverty, fear of shame, insecurity, all justify the decision quietly. The act is framed as mercy, protection, necessity. There is no ceremony, no marker, no legal process. A life ends before it enters memory. Religion does not intervene. Idols do not forbid it. Ritual does not condemn it. Silence becomes permission. Mothers carry this weight differently than fathers. Some resist fiercely. Some comply reluctantly. Some internalize the logic so deeply that it feels inevitable. Grief is private. There is no space for mourning publicly what society accepts. Sons, too, are not free. They are valued, but burdened. Expected to avenge, protect, provide. A boy's life is not his own either, it belongs to lineage. Failure is dishonor. Weakness is shame. Children grow up knowing that affection is conditional. They learn quickly what is rewarded and what is punished. Obedience brings safety. Questioning brings risk. Curiosity must be managed. Orphans reveal the cruelty of the system most clearly. Without fathers, without protectors, children lose value instantly. Their inheritance is contested. Their labor is exploited. Their voices are ignored. No law protects them. Charity is unreliable. An orphan's life depends entirely on the kindness of others, kindness without obligation. You begin to see how early this shapes identity. Children do not imagine futures freely. They imagine roles: son, daughter, asset, burden, honor, risk. Childhood is short. By the time a child understands the world has already decided what they are worth. And yet, children remember. Growing up owing the world. After birth decides a child's value, upbringing enforces it. You see this in how children are spoken to, not gently guided, but directed. Instruction here is not about discovery. It is about preparation. A child is not asked who they want to become. They are told what they must be. Boys are reminded early that they carry names larger than themselves. A mistake is not personal, it stains lineage. Courage is expected. Fear is corrected. Tears are tolerated briefly, then discouraged. A boy who cannot defend honor is seen as unfinished. Girls are reminded early that attention is dangerous. Their movements are watched. Their words are weighed. Their bodies are guarded as symbols long before they are understood as human. A girl's behavior is not just hers. It represents fathers, brothers, uncles, and future husbands. This pressure shapes posture, speech, and silence. Children learn quickly that they owe something to the family before they owe anything to themselves. This debt never expires. Education happens informally. Boys learn through observation, trade, negotiation, dispute. Girls learn through proximity, household management, care, endurance. Knowledge is practical, not expansive. Curiosity is tolerated only if it serves survival. Moral instruction is inconsistent. Children are taught loyalty before fairness, obedience before reflection. Kindness is praised, but only within boundaries. Compassion toward outsiders is risky. Religion reinforces this ambiguity. Rituals include children early, but belief does not protect them. Prayers ask for success, not safety for the vulnerable. Gods accept outcomes without questioning means. You notice how fear becomes instructional. Children learn what happens when expectations are violated, through stories, warnings, and examples. A girl hears about dishonor long before she understands desire. A boy hears about revenge long before he understands conflict resolution. These lessons shape imagination. Children do not grow up dreaming freely. They grow up calculating. And when children calculate early, innocence thins quickly. The treatment of orphans reveals this system most sharply. Orphans are reminders of instability, proof that protection can disappear. They are treated with caution, sometimes kindness, often exploitation. An orphan's property is managed by others. Their labor is expected early. Their future is negotiated without them. If mistreated, they have no recourse. Children watch this. They learn that survival depends on belonging. That kindness is conditional. That security is borrowed, not guaranteed. Some children internalize these lessons fully. They become cautious adults who enforce the same rules. Others carry quiet resentment. They obey, but they remember. Memory forms early. This is how cycles repeat. A society that teaches children they are property trains them to treat others as assets later. Sons grow into fathers who measure daughters. Daughters grow into mothers who fear for daughters. Honor reproduces itself. And yet, cracks appear. Some parents hesitate. They protect daughters fiercely. They shield orphans quietly. They soften expectations inside homes even if they cannot challenge them publicly. These acts do not change the system, but they preserve humanity within it. Children raised with even small amounts of care notice the contrast. They sense that fear is not the only way to organize life. They lack language for it, but the feeling remains. The weight that carried forward. After childhood ends, its lessons do not. You see this clearly in adults who learned early that their worth was conditional. They carry caution into every decision. They calculate risk before kindness. They guard reputation before empathy. The child who learned that survival depends on obedience grows into an adult who enforces obedience. This is how the system sustains itself. Men who were once boys trained to protect honor now police behavior aggressively. They monitor sisters, daughters, wives, not always out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear learned young is persistent. Honor feels fragile because it was taught as fragile. Women who were once girls taught silence become experts at managing it. They know when to speak, when to pause, when to endure. They pass these lessons to daughters with care and sorrow. Protection becomes instruction. Instruction becomes inheritance. The cycle feels inevitable because it is familiar. And yet, familiarity does not erase damage. You begin to notice adults who hesitate before repeating what they were taught. A father delays a decision. A mother questions a custom privately. A guardian treats an orphan with unusual care. These moments are small. They do not challenge the system openly. But they matter. They signal memory working differently. People begin to realize that honor preserved through fear leaves little joy behind. That families held together by anxiety are stable but brittle. That silence protects reputation but corrodes trust. These realizations do not appear as philosophy. They appear as exhaustion. Parents grow tired of fear. Children grow tired of calculation. Everyone grows tired of pretending this is the only way to live. The practice of burying daughters declines gradually in some families, not because it is condemned publicly, but because parents quietly refuse. Refusal here is not rebellion. It is withdrawal. Withdrawal weakens norms slowly. Orphans receive protection in isolated households. Daughters are educated more carefully in rare cases. Sons are taught restraint alongside strength. These changes are uneven, fragile, easily reversed. But they exist. You notice something important now. Once people imagine a different way to treat children, even briefly, returning to old certainty becomes harder. A society can tolerate injustice as long as it feels necessary. Once necessity is questioned, justification must follow. Mecca has not reached that point yet. Children are still measured. Honor still rules. Fear still shapes upbringing. But beneath it all, a quiet question has entered the household. Is this the only way to raise the next generation? That question does not demand immediate answers. It waits. And children raised hearing that question grow up differently. They carry a sense that worth should not be conditional. That life should not be negotiable. That honor might be built on care rather than control. Such ideas are dangerous to old systems. Because they do not attack directly. They outgrow them. And when a society built on fear begins raising people who feel something else is possible, change no longer needs force. A house that everyone claimed. You arrive at the Kaaba not as a pilgrim filled with awe, but as someone trying to understand why this place matters so much, and yet asks so little of the people who circle it. The structure itself is simple. Stone walls. A squared form. No grandeur by later standards. No inscriptions explaining purpose. No written rules posted at the entrance. Its power does not come from beauty or instruction. It comes from agreement. Everyone agrees the Kaaba is sacred. No one fully agrees why. The Kaaba predates living memory. People speak of it as ancient, older than tribes, older than disputes. That age gives it authority. What has lasted this long must matter. That logic alone keeps it central. Around it, idols stand densely. Each represents a tribe, a lineage, a story. The Kaaba does not challenge these gods. It hosts them. It becomes a shared container for competing beliefs. This is its genius. By allowing everyone a place, the Kaaba prevents conflict. No single god dominates. No tribe claims exclusive ownership. Sacred space becomes neutral ground, not morally neutral, but politically neutral. And neutrality is profitable. Pilgrims arrive during sacred months, when fighting is suspended. Markets swell. Trade flourishes. Disputes pause. The Kaaba stabilizes Mecca by creating predictable peace. But peace here is conditional. It lasts only as long as rituals do. You notice something striking. People behave differently inside the sacred boundary, but not necessarily better. Violence pauses, but exploitation continues. Cheating slows, but inequality remains. Ritual creates restraint without transformation. The Kaaba does not instruct. It permits. People circle it, touch its stones, recite inherited phrases. Movements are precise, repeated, unquestioned. The ritual is powerful because it is ancient, not because it is understood. No one asks what the Kaaba demands of them after they leave. Inside this sacred space, slaves walk beside masters. The poor walk beside the wealthy. Women walk beside men. Equality appears briefly, but only in movement, not in meaning. Once the ritual ends, hierarchy resumes untouched. The Kaaba does not interfere. You begin to see the pattern. This is a sacred space designed to unite without challenging. It brings people together physically, but not ethically. It hosts belief without shaping behavior. That makes it widely acceptable. Tribal leaders value it because it protects trade. Poets value it because it preserves tradition. Traders value it because it guarantees safety seasons. Even skeptics tolerate it because it demands nothing uncomfortable. Sacredness here is passive. The Kaaba absorbs prayer, but it does not project instruction. People swear oaths near it, but those oaths are enforced socially, not spiritually. Breaking them carries reputational risk, not moral reckoning. You sense the absence clearly now. There is no call to protect the weak here. No command to restrain the powerful. No reminder that belief should change behavior. The Kaaba sanctifies the existing order by not questioning it. And yet, that silence is exactly what allows it to hold everyone. A moral center would require agreement on values. The Kaaba avoids that. It offers space without direction. For a long time, this is enough. But as Mecca grows more unequal, more strained, more aware of injustice, silence begins to feel less like neutrality and more like avoidance. People still revere the Kaaba. Peace that asked for nothing. After spending time near the Kaaba, you realize that its greatest achievement is also its greatest limitation. It keeps the peace, but only on the surface. During the sacred months, violence pauses. Weapons are lowered. Feuds wait. This pause feels powerful in a land shaped by retaliation. People speak of it with pride. Mecca presents itself as a place where bloodshed can stop. But stopping violence is not the same as creating justice. You watch transactions happen under the shadow of the Kaaba. A trader sells goods at inflated prices to a desperate pilgrim. A debt is enforced harshly while fighting is forbidden. A slave is ordered sharply but not beaten, not because cruelty is wrong, but because the space is sacred. Restraint replaces reform. The Kaaba creates boundaries for behavior without reshaping intent. People wait to act rather than reconsider acting. This distinction matters. Once the sacred months end, disputes resume. Old grievances wake up unchanged. Violence returns as if it had only been sleeping. The Kaaba has taught people how to pause, not how to resolve. You notice how leaders use this pause strategically. Negotiations happen here because fighting cannot. Alliances are formed. Power consolidates. The strong gain advantage precisely because the weak cannot retaliate. Sacred peace becomes a tool. Religion, instead of restraining power, protects it temporarily. The Kaaba offers cover for injustice rather than challenge. You also notice how the sacred space equalizes appearance but not outcome. Everyone walks the same path. Everyone touches the same stones. But when ritual ends, outcomes diverge sharply. A wealthy pilgrim leaves richer through trade. A poor pilgrim leaves poorer through debt. A slave leaves owned. An orphan leaves unprotected. The ritual does not follow them. This creates a subtle disappointment. People feel relief during pilgrimage, then confusion afterward. If the sacred space is truly sacred, why does nothing change? Some respond by increasing ritual. More circling. More offerings. More oaths. They hope repetition will produce meaning. Others grow quiet. They sense that something essential is missing, a link between sacredness and responsibility. The Kaaba does not demand consistency. A man can pray sincerely here and cheat sincerely elsewhere. The two acts do not conflict. Belief and behavior live parallel lives. You begin to see how the Kaaba functions as a mirror rather than a guide. It reflects what people bring into it, reverence, fear, habit, but it does not shape what they take out. For a long time, that is enough. People do not expect sacred space to challenge them. They expect it to protect tradition. But as inequality grows, as injustice becomes harder to ignore, protection begins to feel like permission. Permission to exploit. Permission to ignore. Permission to delay accountability. You hear murmurs now, careful, respectful, uncertain. What does the Kaaba want from us? Why does it not speak against cruelty? Is sacredness only about location? These questions do not accuse the Kaaba. They question its role. The structure remains revered. The rituals remain precise. But the silence begins to feel heavy. Sacred space that refuses moral voice creates stability, but it also creates distance between belief and life. And distance eventually becomes doubt. Not disbelief in the Kaaba's importance, but doubt in its sufficiency. People begin to imagine something radical without naming it, a sacred center that teaches, not just hosts. A place that binds worship to behavior. A space that restrains power, not just violence. A center that speaks. The Kaaba is not that place yet. But it is becoming clear what it is not. And knowing what something is not often comes before knowing what it must become. A center that waited to be rewritten. After generations of use, the Kaaba stands unchanged, and that is precisely the problem. You notice how carefully people preserve it. Stones are repaired. Rituals are protected. Disputes about ownership are avoided. No one wants to be responsible for altering what everyone depends on. The Kaaba has become untouchable, not because it speaks, but because it stabilizes. It holds Mecca together by refusing to judge it. But stability has a cost. A sacred center that does not confront injustice quietly trains people to separate worship from life. The Kaaba becomes a place you visit, not a force you carry. Sacredness stays inside boundaries, while behavior remains unchanged outside them. People grow skilled at compartmentalizing. They can be reverent here and ruthless elsewhere. They can pause violence without addressing its causes. They can swear oaths without changing habits. The Kaaba does not contradict them. This neutrality once felt wise. Now it feels insufficient. You begin to notice who feels this most strongly. Those without power. Those without protection. Those whose lives do not improve through pauses and rituals. For them, sacred space that asks nothing offers little. They still revere the Kaaba. They still circle it, but they do not feel defended by it. They leave as they arrived, vulnerable, unseen, unchanged. This gap between reverence and reality becomes harder to ignore. The Kaaba remains central geographically, but morally it drifts. It no longer anchors values. It merely hosts them. And hosts do not choose. People begin to imagine a sacred center that does more than gather, one that directs. That tells people how to live when they leave the circle. That defines justice, not just peace. This idea does not threaten the Kaaba's structure. It threatens its silence. Because if sacred space begins to speak, it must choose sides. It must condemn exploitation. It must defend the weak. It must bind belief to behavior. And that would change everything. Mecca senses this possibility without naming it. Leaders protect tradition more fiercely. Rituals are emphasized. Idols are honored carefully. The Kaaba's neutrality is defended as wisdom. But defense reveals anxiety. A system that truly satisfies does not need defense. You stand again near the Kaaba, watching people circle. The movement is familiar, calming, ancient. It feels meaningful, but incomplete. The Kaaba has always been a center. Now, for the first time, people are wondering what it should center. Not tribes. Not trade. Not ritual alone. But something that answers the questions their society can no longer ignore. And so the Kaaba waits. Not empty, but ready. Ready to be redefined, not rebuilt. Ready to speak, not just stand. Ready to become a moral axis rather than a neutral ground. Sacred space does not lose power when it gains meaning. It gains consequence. And consequence is what Mecca is about to encounter. Living between thirsts. You understand Mecca differently once you pay attention to water. Not trade, not idols, not poetry. Water. It shapes every decision quietly. It determines where people settle, how long they stay, and how patient they learn to be. In Mecca, water is never assumed. It is searched for, guarded, shared carefully, and remembered. The land does not forgive forgetfulness. There are wells, but they are limited. Some are reliable. Some dry without warning. Families know which ones belong to whom, which ones require permission, which ones carry obligation. Access to water is not a right. It is a relationship. You wake early because water must be collected before heat becomes unbearable. Women and enslaved people carry much of this burden, lifting containers that grow heavier with every step. No one praises this labor. It is expected. Food arrives unevenly. Some comes through trade, grain, dates, dried meat. Some is stored carefully against bad seasons. Some households eat well regularly. Others eat simply, repeatedly, without variety. Hunger is not dramatic here. It is routine. People do not starve suddenly, they thin gradually. Portions shrink. Meals stretch. Children learn not to ask for more. Adults learn to pretend they are not hungry. Waiting becomes a skill. You wait for caravans to arrive. You wait for rain that may not come. You wait for prices to drop. You wait for charity during festivals. You wait because impatience wastes energy. Survival here teaches restraint, but not equality. Those with storage survive better. Those without rely on timing and favor. A bad season exposes hierarchy quickly. You notice how generosity appears during crisis. People share food publicly. Elders distribute supplies. This generosity builds reputation and stabilizes tensions. But it is temporary. Once scarcity passes, inequality returns. Food is not distributed by need. It is distributed by access. Religion does not intervene here either. Ritual prayers ask for rain, but do not organize distribution. The gods are asked to provide, not to equalize. You begin to understand how scarcity shapes morality. When resources are limited, people prioritize those closest to them. Family first. Tribe second. Outsiders last. Compassion narrows naturally. This does not make people cruel. It makes them selective. Children learn early to wait quietly. To accept small portions. To understand that complaining invites shame. Hunger is not something to discuss openly. Water shortages teach similar lessons. Wells are guarded. Access is negotiated. Denial is normalized. Conflict over water can spark violence, but more often it creates long resentment. People remember who denied them water. Memory again becomes law. Survival here is not heroic. It is repetitive. You wake. You fetch. You ration. You wait. This repetition shapes patience, but also resignation. People do not expect abundance. They expect endurance. And when endurance becomes normal, questioning the system feels unnecessary. But endurance has limits. As Mecca grows wealthier through trade, the contrast sharpens. Some households stockpile while others wait. Scarcity no longer feels universal. It feels distributed. That changes perception. People begin to notice that hunger is not always caused by drought. Sometimes it is caused by control. And once people notice that, waiting feels different. Rations that taught obedience. After you notice how scarcity shapes daily life, you begin to see how it shapes behavior. Food and water do more than keep people alive. They organize power. Those who control storage control timing. Those who control timing control people. Grain is stored in large households, guarded carefully. Dates are counted. Water access is remembered. A person who owns resources does not need to threaten openly. Need itself enforces obedience. You see this most clearly during bad seasons. Prices rise slowly at first. Then sharply. People adjust meals quietly. Adults eat less so children can eat. Debts are postponed, then demanded. Labor is offered in exchange for food. Pride erodes before hunger does. No one announces famine. It arrives politely. Charity appears, but it is selective. A wealthy family distributes food publicly, gaining honor. The same family withholds food privately, protecting reserves. Both actions are praised. Giving is admired. Withholding is understood. There is no obligation to feed everyone. This creates a moral imbalance. Survival becomes conditional. People learn to please those with resources. Gratitude replaces dignity. Children watch this closely. They learn that access matters more than fairness. That hunger is solved by proximity to power, not by justice. Water teaches similar lessons. Wells are protected. Access is granted based on relationship. Denial is not explained. It does not need to be. Conflict over water rarely becomes immediate violence. It becomes memory. A denied request is remembered longer than a granted one. Scarcity trains patience, but it also trains submission. People do not challenge those who control resources. They wait for mercy. Waiting becomes a habit, then a virtue. Religion does not correct this. Prayers ask for rain, not redistribution. The gods are asked to increase supply, not question hoarding. This reinforces hierarchy. Trade complicates the picture further. Mecca grows wealthy through caravans, yet hunger persists. Scarcity is no longer purely environmental. It is economic. People begin to notice this contradiction. Why does a city rich in goods still contain hunger? Why do wells exist, yet access feels uncertain? Why does patience feel required of some, but not of others? These questions emerge quietly, born from exhaustion rather than ideology. Waiting begins to feel less like survival and more like control. You notice resentment rising, not explosive, but steady. People comply outwardly while withdrawing inwardly. Trust erodes. Gratitude becomes thin. And still, life continues. People fetch water. They ration food. They wait. Waiting becomes part of identity. But identities shaped by waiting eventually ask what they are waiting for. When endurance stopped feeling virtuous. After years of rationing and patience, something subtle changes in Mecca. People still wait. They still ration. They still fetch water early and stretch food carefully. On the surface, nothing looks different. But endurance begins to feel less like strength and more like burden. You notice it in tone. Complaints remain rare, but silence grows heavier. People no longer speak of hardship with pride. They speak of it as something imposed, not shared. Waiting loses its moral glow. The contrast has become too clear to ignore. Trade continues to bring wealth into the city. Goods arrive in abundance. Yet hunger persists in familiar households. Scarcity no longer feels like fate. It feels managed. That realization matters. A society can endure hardship when it believes it is unavoidable. It struggles when hardship appears selective. You see this most clearly around water. Wells exist. Storage exists. But access depends on permission. Denial no longer feels natural. It feels deliberate. People still wait, but now they watch while waiting. They notice who eats well in bad seasons. They notice whose stores never empty. They notice that patience is expected only from some. This awareness does not produce revolt. It produces quiet alienation. Charity begins to feel insufficient. Public distribution during festivals feels performative. Hunger returns afterward unchanged. Gratitude weakens. Trust erodes. Waiting without hope becomes draining. Parents begin questioning what they are teaching children. They still teach patience, but now they also teach caution, who to depend on, who to avoid, who controls access. Survival becomes strategic. This shifts values. Endurance was once admired, now it feels compulsory, and compulsory virtue is not virtue at all. Religion still asks for patience. Prayers still ask for rain. But people are beginning to ask different questions silently. Why must patience belong to the hungry? Why is waiting moralized rather than solved? Why does belief not address distribution? The sacred center offers no answer. Ritual continues. Hunger continues. The gap between worship and survival widens. You sense readiness now, not anger, but openness. A willingness to hear something new. People are tired of explanations that ask them to wait without change. Waiting has taught them discipline. Scarcity has taught them cooperation. Hard land has taught them restraint. They are not weak. They are prepared. Prepared for a vision that treats food and water not as tools of control, but as shared responsibility. Prepared for a belief that turns patience from submission into dignity. Mecca does not know this yet. But a society shaped by waiting eventually reaches a point where it no longer asks how long, but why. And once that question is asked honestly, survival alone is no longer enough. Violence without surprise. In Mecca, war is not announced. It arrives the way heat does, expected, seasonal, and rarely questioned. You grow up knowing which tribes you may raid and which may raid you. Conflict is not an emergency. It is a condition. Raids happen not because of ideology, but because history has left unfinished business behind. Violence here is procedural. A camel stolen. A man insulted. A debt unpaid. Any of these can justify retaliation. The reason matters less than the response. If harm is unanswered, weakness is revealed. Weakness invites more harm. So raids continue. They are small, calculated, rarely heroic. A group moves quickly at night, takes animals or goods, withdraws before full conflict erupts. Losses are accepted. Death is regrettable but not shocking. Children hear these stories early. Not as trauma, as instruction. They learn that peace is temporary and conditional. That readiness matters more than reconciliation. That war is not always loud, but it is always present. Tribal law reinforces this habit. Blood demands blood or compensation. Forgiveness is risky. Mercy without settlement invites future attack. So memory keeps violence alive. You notice how normalized this becomes. Men sharpen weapons casually. Women prepare for absence. Children learn to read tension in adults' voices. No one asks whether raids solve anything long-term. They ask whether honor has been preserved. Sacred months interrupt this cycle briefly. Fighting pauses. But the pause is not reflection. It is delay. Disputes wait politely for permission to resume. Religion does not challenge the logic of war. Gods bless victory. Defeat signals weakness, not moral failure. Success validates violence retroactively. This removes guilt. War becomes another form of negotiation. Trade routes are protected through threat. Alliances are reinforced through mutual enemies. Raids become communication. You cannot ignore us. We remember. We are still strong. Generations grow up inheriting conflicts they did not start. A boy learns the name of a rival tribe before he learns geography. Hatred is inherited like land. This creates continuity, but also exhaustion. You begin to sense that violence has outlived its usefulness. Raids no longer restore balance. They prolong instability. They drain resources needed elsewhere. But no one wants to be the first to stop. Stopping feels like surrender. So war continues, not because it works, but because alternatives feel dangerous. And when war becomes habit, peace becomes unfamiliar. Honor that needed enemies. After generations of raids, you begin to see how war reshapes identity. Conflict is no longer just something people do. It is something people are. Tribes define themselves partly by who opposes them. Enemy names become markers of belonging. Stories of past raids are repeated until they feel personal, even to those born long after the events. Honor here depends on readiness. A tribe that does not respond to provocation loses standing. A man who avoids conflict risks shame. Peace without victory feels incomplete. This creates a narrow moral frame. Violence is not judged by outcome, but by participation. Showing up matters more than resolving anything. War becomes performative. Young men are especially shaped by this expectation. Courage is proven through participation, not reflection. Fear is tolerated briefly, then dismissed. Questions are not encouraged. A boy learns quickly that his value is tied to willingness to fight. Women absorb the cost differently. They prepare for loss quietly. They manage households in absence. They mourn without ceremony. Their grief does not interrupt the cycle. Children grow up normalizing absence. Fathers leave. Some return. Some do not. Life continues. War settles into routine. Sacred months offer temporary relief. Fighting pauses. Markets open. Negotiations occur. But nothing fundamentally changes. Old grievances remain unresolved. Religion again offers no challenge. Gods favor strength. Victory is interpreted as divine support. Loss is reframed as temporary setback. This reinforces the cycle. Trade and war intertwine. Raids disrupt caravans. Caravans fund raids. Profit and violence feed each other. Over time, the cost accumulates. Animals are lost. Men are injured. Trade becomes riskier. Families grow tired. But fatigue does not produce peace easily. It produces tension. People begin to ask whether honor truly requires constant enemies. Whether bravery can exist without bloodshed. These questions remain private. Publicly, honor still demands action. You sense contradiction growing. A society that depends on trade cannot afford endless conflict. A society that values honor cannot easily abandon it. These two values collide. War once protected resources. Now it threatens them. Yet no mechanism exists to end it cleanly. Forgiveness feels dangerous. Trust feels naive. So conflict continues, not because people want it, but because they cannot imagine who they would be without it. And when identity depends on opposition, peace feels like erasure. Honor that needed enemies. After generations of raids, you begin to see how war reshapes identity. Conflict is no longer just something people do. It is something people are. Tribes define themselves partly by who opposes them. Enemy names become markers of belonging. Stories of past raids are repeated until they feel personal, even to those born long after the events. Honor here depends on readiness. A tribe that does not respond to provocation loses standing. A man who avoids conflict risks shame. Peace without victory feels incomplete. This creates a narrow moral frame. Violence is not judged by outcome, but by participation. Showing up matters more than resolving anything. War becomes performative. Young men are especially shaped by this expectation. Courage is proven through participation, not reflection. Fear is tolerated briefly, then dismissed. Questions are not encouraged. A boy learns quickly that his value is tied to willingness to fight. Women absorb the cost differently. They prepare for loss quietly. They manage households in absence. They mourn without ceremony. Their grief does not interrupt the cycle. Children grow up normalizing absence. Fathers leave. Some return. Some do not. Life continues. War settles into routine. Sacred months offer temporary relief. Fighting pauses. Markets open. Negotiations occur. But nothing fundamentally changes. Old grievances remain unresolved. Religion again offers no challenge. Gods favor strength. Victory is interpreted as divine support. Loss is reframed as temporary setback. This reinforces the cycle. Trade and war intertwine. Raids disrupt caravans. Caravans fund raids. Profit and violence feed each other. Over time, the cost accumulates. Animals are lost. Men are injured. Trade becomes riskier. Families grow tired. But fatigue does not produce peace easily. It produces tension. People begin to ask whether honor truly requires constant enemies. Whether bravery can exist without bloodshed. These questions remain private. Publicly, honor still demands action. You sense contradiction growing. A society that depends on trade cannot afford endless conflict. A society that values honor cannot easily abandon it. These two values collide. War once protected resources. Now it threatens them. Yet no mechanism exists to end it cleanly. Forgiveness feels dangerous. Trust feels naive. So conflict continues, not because people want it, but because they cannot imagine who they would be without it. And when identity depends on opposition, peace feels like erasure. Gods who asked for nothing. You notice something strange about belief in Mecca. People believe deeply, but they are rarely changed by it. Faith is everywhere. It shapes calendars, markets, travel, and speech. Names of gods are spoken casually, woven into greetings and oaths. Rituals are performed precisely, repeated carefully, passed down faithfully. And yet, belief here makes few demands. The gods are present, but distant. They are honored, but not obeyed in any ethical sense. They accept offerings, but they do not issue instructions. They receive praise, but they do not correct behavior. Faith exists without responsibility. You see this most clearly in contradiction. A man prays sincerely, then cheats sincerely. A leader offers sacrifices, then exploits the weak. A tribe swears by its god, then breaks agreements when convenient. No one finds this inconsistent. Belief and behavior occupy separate spaces. One does not interrupt the other. The gods are understood as powers to appease, not guides to follow. They influence outcomes, reign, victory, trade, but not conduct. They reward success, not justice. This shapes morality profoundly. Right and wrong are not anchored in belief. They are anchored in custom, power, and consequence. Religion blesses what already exists rather than reshaping it. You begin to see how comforting this is. A God who asks nothing never condemns. A God who remains silent never accuses. A God who only requires ritual never interferes. Such faith is easy to maintain. It adapts to cruelty without resistance. It coexists with inequality without tension. It explains misfortune as fate rather than failure. Responsibility stays human and uneven. People are not immoral in the sense of lacking values. They care about honor, loyalty, generosity within limits. But these values are enforced socially, not spiritually. Religion does not elevate them into obligation. This leaves gaps. The powerful define morality through action. The weak absorb consequences without appeal. Belief does not protect them. You notice how people talk about gods when things go wrong. A drought is blamed on divine displeasure. A loss in battle is blamed on insufficient offerings. Rarely does anyone blame injustice, arrogance, or exploitation. Faith explains events without examining causes. Children grow up watching this separation. They learn rituals carefully. They learn ethics inconsistently. They understand how to pray long before they understand why fairness matters. This trains compliance, not conscience. Religion becomes a language of reassurance rather than transformation. It tells people the world makes sense, not that it should change. And because the gods never demand ethical consistency, no one feels compelled to examine their own actions deeply. Reflection becomes optional. You begin to sense the danger in this arrangement. A society can survive with weak law if belief restrains power. A society can survive with weak belief if law enforces fairness. Mecca has neither. Tribal custom governs justice. Trade governs value. Religion governs ritual. No single system demands responsibility from everyone equally. Faith, which could have filled that role, remains silent. This silence once felt peaceful. Now it feels evasive. People still believe, still pray, still offer sacrifices. But belief no longer satisfies deeper questions. Why should the strong restrain themselves? Why should wealth carry obligation? Why should power answer to anything beyond success? Faith without ethics cannot answer these. And when belief stops answering moral questions, people do not abandon faith immediately. They begin to wait. Wait for a voice that links worship to conduct. Wait for a message that demands responsibility rather than appeasement. Wait for belief that interrupts life rather than decorating it. Mecca is still faithful. But its faith is empty of instruction. And emptiness, once noticed, does not stay quiet for long. Ritual that replaced conscience. After you recognize that belief in Mecca asks for little, you start noticing what fills the gap. Ritual does. People perform it carefully, repeatedly, confidently. Ritual becomes proof of devotion. The more precise the movement, the stronger the belief appears. Precision replaces reflection. You see this everywhere. Someone who follows ritual correctly is respected, even if their behavior harms others. Someone who questions ritual is viewed with suspicion, even if they act generously. Faith becomes technical. This shifts attention away from character. What matters is not who you are, but whether you perform correctly. Correctness is visible. Ethics are not. Ritual offers reassurance without discomfort. It allows people to feel aligned with the divine without confronting their actions. It comforts rather than challenges. This suits those in power. A leader can sponsor rituals publicly and secure spiritual legitimacy. His authority is reinforced not by justice, but by visible devotion. Criticizing him feels risky, he is close to the gods. Religion becomes a shield. You notice how often disputes are resolved with offerings rather than change. A wrongdoer makes sacrifice. The ritual closes the moment. No apology is required. No restitution demanded. The harm fades from attention. Ritual cleanses without correction. This is especially damaging for the vulnerable. Slaves harmed by owners see their abusers pray freely. Orphans cheated of inheritance watch elders offer sacrifices without consequence. Women mistreated see ritual praised more than restraint. Faith does not intervene. You begin to understand that ritual-heavy belief can coexist comfortably with injustice. It absorbs moral tension instead of resolving it. People feel religious without being accountable. Children learn this separation early. They are taught how to perform rituals before they are taught why kindness matters. They learn to appease rather than evaluate. They learn that devotion is about accuracy, not impact. This creates moral confusion. A child may pray perfectly and still bully. An adult may sacrifice generously and still exploit. There is no contradiction within the system. Ritual has become a substitute for conscience. You also notice that ritual grows when anxiety grows. During hardship, offerings increase. During conflict, prayers multiply. But behavior rarely changes. People turn toward ritual instead of responsibility. This creates exhaustion. Ritual multiplies without producing clarity. The more people perform, the less they feel resolved. Some begin to withdraw quietly. Not from belief but from ritual excess. They shorten prayers. They question necessity. They feel embarrassed by mechanical repetition. They do not reject faith. They reject emptiness. These individuals feel something is missing, not gods, but guidance. They sense that belief should demand something of them: honesty, restraint, care, not just movement and offering. The gap becomes clear. Ritual tells people how to worship. It does not tell them how to live. And a society cannot be guided by ritual alone. As inequality deepens, as war continues, as exploitation persists, people begin to ask whether the gods care at all about what happens between humans. That question is dangerous. Because once asked, ritual alone cannot silence it. When belief was asked to answer. After long reliance on ritual, Mecca reaches a moment of quiet discomfort. People still believe, still pray, still perform, but belief no longer feels complete. It no longer explains suffering. It no longer justifies power. It no longer calms conscience the way it once did. You sense it in conversations that trail off. In pauses after ritual ends. In the way people look thoughtful rather than relieved. Faith is still present, but it is no longer convincing on its own. The separation between belief and behavior has become too visible. People see generous offerings paired with cruelty. They see prayer paired with exploitation. They see devotion used as cover rather than correction. This creates unease. A belief system that does not restrain the powerful eventually loses credibility among the powerless. Those most affected by injustice no longer expect faith to protect them, but they still hope it might explain why things are the way they are. It does not. Religion's silence now feels like absence, not peace. You notice how people begin asking different questions. Not about which god is stronger, but about what the gods want. Not what pleases them, but what they require. And the unsettling realization follows. The gods do not require anything uncomfortable. They do not forbid exploitation. They do not condemn cruelty. They do not protect the weak. Belief has become descriptive rather than directive. This does not lead to immediate rejection. People rarely abandon belief suddenly. They live with it, stretch it, wait within it. But waiting for meaning creates openness. You begin to see people listen differently when ideas of accountability surface. They are drawn to language that connects worship to action, faith to conduct, belief to responsibility. They are tired of rituals that ask them to move but not to change. The powerful sense this shift and resist it. They emphasize tradition. They defend ritual precision. They warn against disruption. They argue that belief should remain familiar, manageable, silent. But resistance reveals fear. A faith that truly satisfies does not need protection. You see now how fragile the old arrangement has become. It relied on silence. Silence is breaking. People want belief that explains why kindness matters, why power must restrain itself, why wealth carries obligation, why every life matters beyond utility. These questions are moral, not political. They arise from lived experience, not theory. Mecca is not rejecting faith. It is demanding more from it. And once people demand ethics from belief, ritual alone cannot survive. Faith must either speak, or be replaced by something that does. The city has not yet heard that voice. But it is listening. And listening changes everything. Lives without shields. In Mecca, protection is everything. You learn this early, not through instruction, but through observation. You watch how people speak differently to those with strong families. How disputes end quickly when a powerful name is mentioned. How confidence changes posture. And then you notice those who lack all of this. Orphans. They are easy to spot, not because they look different, but because the world treats them differently. Conversations around them shorten. Promises weaken. Boundaries blur. What is unthinkable with others becomes negotiable with them. An orphan is not simply a child without parents. An orphan is a person without a shield. In a society where law is tribal and justice is relational, guardianship is protection. Without it, rights dissolve quietly. No announcement is made. No declaration of loss. Protection simply fails to appear when needed. You see it first in inheritance. When a father dies, his property does not automatically secure his children's future. It must be managed by male relatives or appointed guardians. This management is informal, based on trust rather than oversight. Trust fails often. An orphan's wealth is looked after, but slowly consumed. Animals are sold. Goods disappear. Accounts are blurred. By the time the child grows, little remains. No record proves wrongdoing. Memory protects the guardian. The child learns early not to ask questions. Education suffers next. Orphans are taught survival skills, not opportunities. They work early. They serve households. They are useful before they are valued. Their labor replaces their childhood. You notice how people justify this. They speak of responsibility, of burden, of necessity. No one calls it exploitation openly. Language softens reality. Religion does not intervene. Gods accept offerings from guardians who misuse wealth. Ritual does not protect property. Faith offers comfort, not enforcement. Orphans learn that belief does not shield them. Socially, they exist on the margins. Marriage prospects are weaker. Alliances less valuable. Their future depends on who will accept them, not on what they deserve. This creates a deep vulnerability. An orphan wronged has no voice strong enough to demand response. Complaints risk retaliation. Silence feels safer. Children see this and learn the lesson well. Belonging determines justice. You begin to sense how this affects moral development. A child raised unprotected learns caution before trust, compliance before confidence, gratitude before dignity. These traits help survival. They also shape a society that accepts imbalance. Women orphans face additional danger. Without male protectors, they are vulnerable to forced marriages, exploitation, and neglect. Their consent is easily overridden. Their resistance carries little weight. The system does not intend cruelty. It simply has no place for the unprotected. And that is what makes it dangerous. A society that requires guardianship for justice will always fail those without guardians. You see how quietly this happens. No riots, no outrage, just a slow narrowing of possibility. Orphans grow into adults carrying a particular knowledge that fairness is optional and protection is everything. This knowledge spreads invisibly. A society can survive many injustices. Care that was conditional. After you notice how orphans lose protection, you begin to see how conditional care really is. People do help orphans. That is important to say. Food is shared. Shelter is offered. Work is found. But help here is voluntary, inconsistent, and fragile. It depends on mood, reputation, and convenience, not obligation. Care is offered as kindness, not duty. This distinction shapes everything. An orphan learns early that survival depends on pleasing others. Gratitude must be visible. Obedience must be constant. Any sign of resistance risks withdrawal of support. Care becomes a transaction. You see this in households that take in orphaned children. They are fed, clothed, and housed, but also expected to work harder than others. They are reminded subtly that they are being helped. Their mistakes are less tolerated. Their futures are not planned for. They grow up earning their place daily. Education, when it happens, is minimal. Orphans learn skills useful to the household, not knowledge that might allow independence. Teaching too much risks losing control. This is not usually planned. It emerges naturally from imbalance. Guardians may convince themselves they are generous. And compared to abandonment, they are. But generosity without accountability often becomes exploitation without intention. Religion again does not interfere. There is no sacred rule protecting orphan wealth or dignity. Gods do not threaten guardians who misuse trust. Ritual praise flows equally to the careful and the corrupt. This silence matters. Children notice which harms provoke response and which do not. An insult to a powerful man sparks action. Theft from an orphan disappears into explanation. Orphans internalize this quickly. They stop expecting fairness. They adapt instead. Girls orphaned young face even narrower paths. Without fathers or brothers, marriage decisions are made for them. Consent becomes optional. Protection is exchanged for obedience. Boys orphaned young are pushed into labor early. Strength becomes necessity. Vulnerability is punished. Childhood ends fast. Orphans also lack advocates in disputes. If wronged by a neighbor or employer, they have no one to negotiate on their behalf. Retaliation is dangerous. Silence feels safer. This teaches a particular lesson. Injustice is survivable if you accept it. That lesson spreads quietly. People raised unprotected often grow into adults who value power above fairness. They seek protection at all costs. They attach themselves to strong figures. They repeat the system because it feels safer than vulnerability. This is how injustice reproduces itself without malice. You begin to see why orphans matter so much to a society's moral health. They reveal whether care is structural or accidental, whether justice is universal or conditional. In Mecca, care is generous but optional. Justice is relational but unequal. The powerful may never feel this gap, but the unprotected live inside it every day. And as their numbers grow, so does quiet disillusionment. People start noticing that kindness alone cannot protect the vulnerable. That goodwill fades. That promises dissolve. They begin to imagine something unfamiliar: care as obligation. Not charity. Not favor. But duty. This idea feels radical, dangerous. It threatens freedom of the powerful. But it also answers a problem Mecca can no longer ignore. When neglect became visible. After long years of quiet dependence, the cost of conditional care begins to surface. You see it in adults who grew up unprotected. They are cautious, capable, and distant. They trust slowly. They expect little. They navigate power carefully because they learned early that fairness does not arrive on its own. These adults carry skill, but also resentment. They know how systems work because they were shaped by their edges. They understand which rules matter and which can be ignored. They value protection over principle because principle never protected them. This changes a society from the inside. Orphans who survive grow into people who replicate the logic they endured. They attach themselves to strong patrons. They enforce hierarchy once they gain power. Not always out of cruelty, but out of fear learned early. The cycle tightens. You notice something else now. People begin to talk about orphans more often. Not sentimentally, practically. They mention misuse of inheritance. They notice exploitation. They feel discomfort. This is new. Previously, neglect was accepted as unfortunate but normal. Now it feels visible. It feels like a problem rather than a condition. Why the change? Because Mecca has grown more complex. Trade has brought wealth. Religion has brought ritual. Poetry has preserved pride. Yet orphans remain unprotected. The contrast sharpens. A society that can pause war, protect trade, and preserve ritual should be able to protect children without guardians. The fact that it does not becomes harder to justify. People begin to sense that vulnerability is not accidental, it is tolerated. This awareness does not produce outrage. It produces readiness. Readiness to hear a different idea of responsibility. Readiness to imagine care that does not depend on favor. Readiness to accept that some duties should be non-negotiable. You hear it in private conversations. Someone should watch over them. There should be rules. This is not right. These are not revolutionary statements. They are exhausted ones. Religion, once silent, now feels insufficient. Ritual does not protect inheritance. Offerings do not restrain guardians. Belief comforts, but does not defend. The Kaaba remains central, but it does not answer this. People do not yet know what will. But they are prepared for a message that insists protection of the unprotected is not generosity, it is obligation. A belief that treats neglect not as misfortune, but as moral failure. For the orphan, such a message would not feel new. It would feel recognized. Mecca has not yet heard that message clearly. But the ground is ready. Because a society can ignore injustice for a long time, until it realizes that injustice is shaping who it becomes. And Mecca is beginning to see itself through the eyes of those it failed to protect. Doubt without rebellion. Not everyone in Mecca accepts the world as it is. Most people follow custom because it works, because it is familiar, because questioning it feels dangerous or pointless. But scattered among traders, shepherds, widows, and travelers are people who carry a quiet discomfort. They do not organize. They do not protest. They do not preach. They simply notice. You meet them in ordinary places. A trader who refuses to swear by idols but keeps it to himself. A traveler who avoids excess ritual and spends nights thinking instead. A widow who questions why kindness must depend on favor. A man who feels uneasy praising gods that never restrain cruelty. They are not radicals. They are observers. These people are often called strange, withdrawn, impractical. Not threatening, just different. They do not fit neatly into Mecca's rhythms. They participate enough to survive, but not enough to feel satisfied. They sense contradiction everywhere. They see idols honored while injustice continues untouched. They see ritual praised while behavior remains unchanged. They see trade prosper while hunger persists. They feel that something essential is missing, not tradition, but direction. These quiet thinkers do not have a system to replace what they question. They are not philosophers in the formal sense. They lack language, institutions, and protection. Their thoughts remain private because public doubt invites danger. So they practice restraint. They withdraw from idol worship quietly. They reduce ritual. They avoid swearing oaths they do not believe in. Some seek solitude outside the city. Others travel often, using distance as cover for thought. They are not united by doctrine. They are united by discomfort. Many believe in a single, unseen God, not tied to idols, not represented by stone. This belief is vague, inherited from stories, influenced by travelers, shaped by intuition rather than law. They are sometimes called Hanifs, people who incline away from idols without forming a new religion. Their belief does not bring them status. It does not protect them. It does not offer social advantage. It simply feels more honest. Honesty here is costly. These thinkers are careful. They do not insult idols publicly. They do not challenge elders directly. They know how fragile peace is. They know how violent reaction can be. So they wait. Waiting is familiar in Mecca. But their waiting is not passive. It is attentive. They listen closely when people speak of injustice. They notice which ideas resonate. They pay attention to suffering others accept as normal. They feel isolated, but not alone. They recognize each other through behavior rather than words. A refusal to mock the weak. A discomfort with exploitation. A tendency to reflect rather than repeat. These traits mark them quietly. You begin to understand their importance. Societies rarely change because the powerful decide to change. They change because ideas circulate quietly until they are ready. These thinkers carry those ideas. They are not strong enough to act. They are not numerous enough to lead. But they are enough to recognize when something new appears. Thinking as risk. After you recognize the quiet thinkers, you begin to understand the cost of their silence. In Mecca, thought itself can be dangerous. Not because people are forbidden to think, but because thinking separates you. It loosens your grip on certainty. It makes routine feel questionable. And once routine is questioned, belonging feels less secure. The quiet thinkers live with this tension daily. They still trade. They still attend gatherings. They still speak respectfully to elders. Outwardly, they blend in. But inwardly, they carry questions that never fully rest. They ask themselves things others avoid. Why does honor protect cruelty? Why does belief excuse exploitation? Why does survival require silence? These questions do not make them feel superior. They make them feel uneasy. Awareness brings no relief here, only responsibility without authority. You see how carefully they manage speech. They choose words that do not provoke. They avoid public debate. They redirect conversations gently. Silence becomes a form of self-defense. This restraint is not cowardice. It is calculation. A person who challenges idols openly risks isolation or violence. A person who questions trade ethics risks livelihood. A person who criticizes tribal justice risks retaliation. So the thinkers survive by thinking quietly. Many of them travel. Travel gives them cover. Away from Mecca, they hear different customs. They see communities organized differently. Some places have written rules. Some limit revenge. Some protect the poor more deliberately. These encounters do not convert them. They complicate them. They realize Mecca's way is not the only way. This knowledge cannot be undone. When they return, they notice Mecca more sharply. They see how often people confuse tradition with necessity. They see how fear masquerades as honor. But they also see why people cling to it. Change threatens stability. Stability protects survival. Survival feels more urgent than justice. The quiet thinkers understand this. They do not despise their society. They belong to it. They know its strengths. They respect its endurance. Their doubt is not rejection. It is grief. Grief for what could be better but feels unreachable. You notice how often these thinkers speak about responsibility, but only in private. They discuss obligations to neighbors, fairness in trade, restraint in power. They act on these beliefs individually, not institutionally. They forgive debts quietly. They treat slaves gently. They protect orphans discreetly. These actions do not change the system. They barely register publicly, but they sustain the thinkers themselves. They allow them to live with integrity inside a structure that does not reward it. Integrity becomes personal rather than social. This is exhausting. Over time, some thinkers retreat further. They avoid gatherings. They seek solitude, not because they hate people, but because contradiction wears them down. Others remain engaged, hoping influence might spread slowly. They tell stories rather than arguments. They ask questions rather than make claims. They plant discomfort gently. They are waiting, not for power, but for coherence. A belief system that matches their sense of justice. A language that connects worship to behavior. A structure that does not require silence to survive. They do not know if such a thing will appear. But they are ready if it does. And readiness matters. Because when a society is filled only with obedience, new ideas shatter it. But when a society contains quiet thinkers, new ideas settle into prepared minds. Mecca is closer to that moment than it realizes. Because thinking, once it begins, does not reverse. It waits. And waiting thinkers are often the first to recognize meaning when it finally speaks. When readiness became recognition. After years of thinking without voice, the quiet thinkers reach a subtle turning point. Nothing dramatic happens to them. No announcement. No revelation they can claim as their own. But something inside them shifts from questioning to listening. They are no longer just unsure about the world. They are alert for something that resolves the unease. You notice it in how they respond to conversations. When someone speaks of injustice, they lean in slightly. When someone mentions responsibility, they pause. When someone questions idols or power or ritual, they do not rush to defend or dismiss. They wait. Waiting, for them, has changed meaning. It is no longer endurance. It is expectation. They have learned something crucial over time. Systems rarely collapse from force alone. They change when an idea appears that feels truer than what came before. The quiet thinkers are not looking for novelty. They are looking for coherence. A belief that aligns worship with behavior. A moral framework that restrains the strong without destroying order. A vision of dignity that does not depend on tribe, wealth, or protection. They do not yet know the shape of this vision. But they know what it must do. It must speak clearly, not in poetry alone, not in ritual alone, not in silence. It must explain why kindness matters even when it costs something. It must make responsibility unavoidable rather than optional. Most importantly, it must give language to what they have felt but never articulated. You realize now why these thinkers never became a movement. Movements require certainty. They require slogans, demands, visible opposition. The quiet thinkers never had certainty, only clarity about what was missing. That made them invisible. But invisibility has advantages. They were not crushed. They were not silenced violently. They were not forced to defend half-formed ideas. They survived intact. And survival preserves receptivity. When a message finally appears that challenges idols, confronts injustice, protects the vulnerable, and binds belief to ethics, these thinkers will not ask first whether it is convenient. They will ask whether it is true. And truth, once recognized, is difficult to ignore. They will recognize it not as disruption, but as relief. Relief that doubt was not betrayal. Relief that conscience was not weakness. Relief that waiting had meaning. The quiet thinkers will not shout first. They rarely do, but they will listen first. And listening is how ideas spread safely. They will test the message privately, then live it publicly. They will adjust behavior before demanding others change. They will embody rather than argue. This is how ideas survive hostility. Mecca does not yet know how many of its people are quietly prepared for transformation. Prepared not to overthrow society, but to reorient it. Because the most powerful ideas do not arrive to empty minds. They arrive to minds that have been waiting. And once recognition happens, silence no longer feels necessary. When readiness became recognition. After years of thinking without voice, the quiet thinkers reach a subtle turning point. Nothing dramatic happens to them. No announcement. No revelation they can claim as their own. But something inside them shifts from questioning to listening. They are no longer just unsure about the world. They are alert for something that resolves the unease. You notice it in how they respond to conversations. When someone speaks of injustice, they lean in slightly. When someone mentions responsibility, they pause. When someone questions idols or power or ritual, they do not rush to defend or dismiss. They wait. Waiting, for them, has changed meaning. It is no longer endurance. It is expectation. They have learned something crucial over time: systems rarely collapse from force alone. They change when an idea appears that feels truer than what came before. The quiet thinkers are not looking for novelty. They are looking for coherence. A belief that aligns worship with behavior. A moral framework that restrains the strong without destroying order. A vision of dignity that does not depend on tribe, wealth, or protection. They do not yet know the shape of this vision. But they know what it must do. It must speak clearly, not in poetry alone, not in ritual alone, not in silence. It must explain why kindness matters even when it costs something. It must make responsibility unavoidable rather than optional. Most importantly, it must give language to what they have felt but never articulated. You realize now why these thinkers never became a movement. Movements require certainty. They require slogans, demands, visible opposition. The quiet thinkers never had certainty, only clarity about what was missing. That made them invisible. But invisibility has advantages. They were not crushed. They were not silenced violently. They were not forced to defend half-formed ideas. They survived intact. And survival preserves receptivity. When a message finally appears that challenges idols, confronts injustice, protects the vulnerable, and binds belief to ethics, these thinkers will not ask first whether it is convenient. They will ask whether it is true. And truth, once recognized, is difficult to ignore. They will recognize it not as disruption, but as relief. Relief that doubt was not betrayal. Relief that conscience was not weakness. Relief that waiting had meaning. The quiet thinkers will not shout first. They rarely do, but they will listen first. And listening is how ideas spread safely. They will test the message privately, then live it publicly. They will adjust behavior before demanding others change. They will embody rather than argue. This is how ideas survive hostility. Mecca does not yet know how many of its people are quietly prepared for transformation. Prepared not to overthrow society, but to reorient it. Because the most powerful ideas do not arrive to empty minds. They arrive to minds that have been waiting. And once recognition happens, silence no longer feels necessary. Pressure without a crack. After you notice how well Mecca still functions, you begin to understand why change has taken so long. Nothing is broken enough. Hunger exists, but not famine. Violence exists, but not total war. Injustice exists, but not chaos. Every problem has a coping mechanism. And coping is persuasive. When food is scarce, people ration. When conflict rises, sacred months pause it. When resentment grows, charity absorbs it. When doubt appears, ritual quiets it. These mechanisms do not solve problems, they manage them. And management creates the illusion of control. This is how pressure builds without explosion. You see people adapting constantly. They adjust expectations. They lower demands. They redefine what normal means. Survival teaches flexibility, and flexibility delays confrontation. But adaptation has a cost. People begin shrinking their moral expectations the way they shrink meals. They ask less of leaders. Less of belief. Less of each other. This makes life manageable, but also emptier. You notice a strange resignation settling in. Not despair, but acceptance without conviction. People stop expecting justice and focus on avoiding harm. They stop hoping for fairness and aim for stability. Stability becomes the highest value. This protects Mecca from collapse, and traps it there. Because stability achieved through avoidance cannot evolve. You see how elders respond to discomfort now. They do not deny problems. They acknowledge them politely, then redirect attention. They speak of tradition, patience, balance. Their language is calm, practiced, reassuring. It works. People trust elders because elders kept things from falling apart before. But trust built on past survival struggles to guide future complexity. The city has outgrown its tools. Trade has linked Mecca to distant cultures. Ideas circulate faster. Comparisons become unavoidable. People hear that other societies handle inheritance differently, restrain revenge more deliberately, regulate trade more clearly. This knowledge does not produce rebellion. It produces embarrassment. People realize Mecca's customs are not universal truths. They are choices, and choices can be judged. But judging them publicly feels dangerous. Custom still protects identity. Questioning it feels like questioning belonging. So pressure continues to build internally. You notice how often people speak nostalgically now. They idealize the past, not because it was better, but because it felt simpler. Nostalgia becomes defense. But simplicity is no longer possible. Mecca is too interconnected, too wealthy, too complex. The systems that once worked through habit now require intention. And intention demands clarity. This is where pressure concentrates, in the absence of moral clarity. People are not asking for revolution. They are asking for explanation. For coherence. For a way to understand why some lives matter less and why that is acceptable. No one can answer convincingly. Religion avoids the question. Custom deflects it. Power benefits from it. Silence remains. But silence under pressure behaves differently than silence under comfort. It hums. You can feel it in the city. In the way people pause before swearing oaths. In the way ritual ends without relief. In the way disputes settle formally but linger emotionally. Mecca has reached a point where pressure no longer needs a cracked escape. It needs direction. And direction rarely comes from systems designed only to maintain balance. It comes from voices willing to say, "This is wrong, and it must change," not violently, not recklessly, but decisively. The city does not yet know that such a voice is close. But it is already leaning forward. When readiness became tension. After pressure builds without breaking, Mecca enters its most fragile phase. Nothing dramatic happens. No riots. No famine. No invasion. The streets look the same. The rituals continue. Trade flows. But readiness has turned into tension. You feel it in how people listen now. Conversations that once drifted are suddenly attentive. A remark about fairness lingers longer than expected. A story about restraint travels further than usual. People are not seeking entertainment anymore, they are scanning for meaning. Scanning is dangerous. Because it means the old explanations no longer satisfy. People still follow custom, but they no longer defend it instinctively. They still perform ritual, but they no longer expect it to resolve inner conflict. They still accept hierarchy, but they no longer believe it reflects worth. Belief has become provisional. This is not rebellion. It is re-evaluation. You notice how small changes take on outsized importance. A trader who refuses to cheat gains quiet respect. A man who restrains vengeance is noticed. A family that protects an orphan without advantage is spoken about. These actions are not yet contagious. But they are legible. People are reading behavior differently now, measuring it against an emerging sense of right rather than inherited habit. The city is becoming morally alert. That alertness creates anxiety for those who benefit most from the old arrangements. They sense instability not in the streets, but in assumptions. They respond by emphasizing order, unity, tradition. They warn against disruption. They praise patience. They remind people how much worse things could be. They are not wrong. But their language feels defensive. A system that truly fits does not need to insist on its necessity. You stand again at the Kaaba and notice something subtle. People still circle it, but their faces look thoughtful rather than settled. Sacred movement continues, but expectation has shifted. The ritual feels like it is waiting to be filled with meaning rather than providing it. The center is still strong. But it is hollow. This hollowness is not emptiness. It is space. Space for instruction. Space for obligation. Space for a moral axis. Mecca has become a city that no longer resists change instinctively. It resists chaos, but not clarity. That distinction matters. Because when a society is ready for clarity, even gentle words can rearrange it. Loud force is no longer required. Authority shifts quietly. The most powerful moment in history is rarely collapse. It is recognition. Recognition that the old answers no longer answer. Recognition that endurance is not the same as justice. Recognition that survival without meaning is not enough. Mecca is at that moment now. It does not yet know what it will choose. But it knows it must choose something. And once choice becomes unavoidable, neutrality ends. A city that has mastered stability now stands at the edge of transformation, not because it is failing, but because it is prepared to be challenged.